At the luxurious royal ball, Prince Lyle, with a face twisted in anger, raised his hand and decisively announced the cancellation of his engagement to Miss Alicia Furman in front of everyone, leaving Alicia in a pale pink dress stunned and the guests in shock. Unexpectedly, Princess Lucia, standing nearby, smiled slyly and praised her foolish younger brother for handling it so well. She stepped forward with a victorious smile and firmly stated that once the proclamation was made, it could not be withdrawn, while Alicia behind her could not believe this sudden turn of events. The narrative shifted to Princess Lucia's memories, who smiled recalling the efforts she and others had made to follow the script once described by Alicia, and thought to herself that today was the culmination of their long preparations. The story rewound 10 years back to the kingdom of Fatija, when 11-year-old Prince Roy set out to find his 8-year-old sister, Princess Lucia, after a tea party. Lucia pouted in front of her brother and confessed she did not want sycophants, she wanted real friends, although she knew well that this was especially difficult for a princess. Prince Roy asked where Lucia was heading next, and she replied that she wanted to return to the tea party to look for friends. There she noticed a little girl with golden hair and pale violet eyes, standing alone in a corner of the garden. Miss Alicia fermendalishly cute, but radiating shyness and aloofness. Suddenly a piercing scream rang out. The tea party froze and ended prematurely. Alicia suddenly fainted, and Prince Lyle, standing nearby, panicked and insisted that he had done nothing to her. After that, Prince Roy and Princess Lucia rushed to Alicia, hearing that she was having nightmares and constantly whispering terrible words, path of accusation, and terrible end. Lucia gently shook Alicia, pulling her out of the nightmare, and as soon as she opened her eyes and saw Lucia, Alicia burst into tears and in horror and despair called her a secondary princess, because she believed that according to the script of her past life, she was doomed to death and inevitable execution. Seeing Alicia cry as if her eyes were melting, Princess Lucia gently comforted her and said that if she cried too much, she would miss the beautiful flowers and delicious pastries. Prince Roy awkwardly extended a handkerchief to Alicia, and she trembled and said she did not want to die and was afraid that people would hurt her. Lucia firmly told Alicia that there were only the three of them here, so no one would harm her. She asked if Alicia really considered her and Roy such evil people. At the same time, Lucia asked the servants to leave so that Alicia could calmly reveal the secret she had been hiding, no matter how crazy it seemed. Alicia began recalling memories from her previous life and confessed. According to the future scenario, after this tea party she was supposed to get engaged to the second Prince Lyle and enter the Royal Academy together. But after becoming his fiancée, Alicia grew arrogant. Lyle fell in love with the daughter of some baroness. Jealousy pushed her to harm that girl. As a result, the engagement was broken off, and she herself was publicly accused and condemned. Alicia continued, telling about that fateful graduation when Prince Lyle broke off our engagement in front of everyone and accused me of being a cunning secondary villainess, while Lucia and Roy listened, holding their breath. Lucia noted that Alicia's jealousy was a perfectly natural reaction of an officially engaged woman who sees her future husband intimately with another, while Roy expressed condemnation of Lyle for his relations with another girl despite their engagement. The tension in the air sharply increased when Alicia revealed her fate was not just annulment, but execution, and Lucia froze in surprise because noble laws never punished mistreatment of a baroness's daughter with death. But Alicia, sobbing, explained that she was accused of an attempt on the future queen, and trembled, assuring that she never wanted that and only wished to live in peace. Lucia tried to calm her friend. The engagement with Lyle was not yet sealed, so everything could change, but Alicia was terribly afraid that the intrusive power of the scenario would force events to follow the same path as her past life. She confessed, according to the original scenario, she was not supposed to meet Prince Lyle today, but later, but because she pretended to be ill to avoid the meeting, everything began to go wrong. Lucia thought to herself that with Lyle in his current arrogant and lazy nature, it was hard to imagine that he would become the amazing Prince Alicia spoke of. Alicia shyly looked at Roy and asked if he would really become a great man. Immediately, another terrible fact surfaced from her memory. The Emperor would die in an accident during an inspection 10 years ago, and Prince Roy would die of illness 5 years after that. The news of the death of her father and brother unsettled Lucia. She gasped in shock, and Alicia pressed her hand to her mouth in panic, fearing she would be accused of betrayal. She added that in her memories of her past life, after losing the dearest person, Prince Lyle was forced to grow up, and it was the emotional support of the heroine that helped him become a strong king, while Alicia, as the official fiancée, became an obstacle to this fading love. Lucia quickly pulled herself together and felt the full weight of the situation. If the Emperor and Ire had died earlier, the kingdom would have fallen into chaos, so she urgently asked Alicia when exactly her father's accident happened. Alicia confirmed it was a landslide caused by prolonged and heavy rain. While the Emperor was conducting an inspection, the carriage fell into a ravine. Prince Roy pondered, Although adults find it hard to believe children's words, they simply could not remain indifferent. At that moment, Marquis Furman, Alicia's father, ran into the room with a panicked expression, having heard that his daughter had fainted. But when Alicia saw that he was fine, she joyfully called her father. Having made sure Alicia was safe, Marquis Furman hurriedly apologized to their highnesses for his harshness, and Lucia took the moment to ask the Marquis to allow her to become Alicia's close friend, as she had grown very attached to the girl. Princess's frank request surprised and embarrassed Alicia's father. Marquis Furman hesitantly said that his daughter was of weak health and feared she might not be able to serve the princess properly. He asked if Alicia had spoken about any strange dreams about past lives, but Roy quickly denied this to protect her. Lucia firmly insisted that she wanted to cooperate with the Marquis and made a bold proposal. If, as Alicia said, an accident really happened to the Emperor, then people must believe what the girl said. Lucia resolutely declared that she would not give her father to death, and despite protests from Roy and Marquis Furman, she secretly decided to follow the inspection group, demanding that the Marquis immediately create protective magical stones for the trip. Then she rushed to her room to grab the precious stones, and her brother just looked on in shock. Thus began her bold plan to change fate. This story tells where the magical stones came from. These are precious crystals that mages study to preserve spell formulas and create impressive things with almost no mana expenditure. However, cheap household stones easily crack under the blows of powerful offensive or defensive spells. Therefore, Lucia created her own high-quality gems and asked Marquis Furman to imbue them with the strongest protective magic. Lucia pulled out a large gemstone, an inheritance from her late mother, so that the Marquis could work with it. Although he feared that the precious stone might be damaged when the magic activated, Lucia insisted that her mother would definitely approve its use if it saved her father's life. The girl held back her sadness and assured that if it could be avoided, she would not use it. But if necessary, she would rather sacrifice the gemstone than let it gather dust in the jewelry box until her wedding. Marquis Furman and Prince Roy discussed that although the royal carriage had enhancement magic, it could still crash, and suddenly Alicia gave the example of a tin of cookies. The box itself might not break if dropped from a height, but the cookies inside would crumble from the impact. This made Lucia realize that no matter how strong the carriage was on the outside, the people inside could still be mortally shaken without internal cushioning. Alicia suggested filling the carriage with water to soften the impact if it fell into a ravine, but Lucia immediately objected everyone would drown because there would be no air to breathe. After the crazy idea of filling the carriage with soft substances like slime or gel, which would also allow breathing, Alicia left their highnesses completely amazed. They had never heard of such strange things from the world she spoke of. Noticing everyone's surprised reactions, Alicia quickly explained that these were just things from her imagination, which were pliable like jelly. Meanwhile, Lucia noticed small stones in Marquis Furman's ribbon and immediately came up with the idea. Instead of one large one, many small ones. She believed that scattering magical stones throughout the carriage cabin would create a protective net that would better save her father. Impressed by Lucia's determination, Marquis Furman agreed to side with Alicia and help the children, and stunned everyone by revealing that her current mana level had already exceeded 12. An extremely impressive figure for a child. Nobles usually only have 710. Even Prince Roy at 18 had about that level, and he was amazed by the girl's talent. Lucia realized that with such powerful mana, Alicia's choice as the main candidate for Prince Lyle's bride was not bad luck, but inevitability. Alicia shouted she didn't care about talent and titles, she just wanted to avoid the path to accusations. But Lucia smiled brightly and reassured her. As long as Alicia does not repeat the evil deeds from the script of her past life, the future will definitely change. Lucia sharply advised Alicia, if you don't want to marry Lyle, just ignore him and focus on studying so there is no time for romantic matters. She also taught Alicia to respond decisively to accusations and demand concrete evidence so that no one could arbitrarily accuse her, and Alicia was deeply impressed by the maturity and strength of the 8-year-old princess. Lucia loudly declared, although Alicia's story portrays her as simple-minded, a secondary figure, she remained herself and was a princess in line for the throne of Fadija, so she vowed to use all her abilities to save her father, brother, and Alicia's future. Deeply moved by this passion, Alicia decided to boldly follow Lucia to change their gloomy fates together. Prince Roy and Marquis Furman smiled and agreed to join the plan to save the kingdom, as they were all united by one goal: to protect their families. Lucia shone, took Alicia's hand, and joyfully said that from now on they would become close friends and fight together for a new future. Alicia brightly answered, yes, happy and with new hope, closing the first page of their journey that was to change fate. The small hands of Princess Lucia and Miss Alicia tightly clasped amid falling romantic petals, and from that day it became an important milestone. A deep friendship began, and a wonderful, promising 10-year journey for two started to overcome the challenges of fate together. When Alicia left, Lucia remained alone and long gazed at her mother's heirloom stone, convincing herself. Although she did not want to use it at all, she had to dare for the sake of her father's safety. Just then Prince Roy entered with a worried look and declared that he could not agree to his sister joining the dangerous inspection group, especially since he would soon have to enter the Royal Academy and would not be able to be nearby to protect her. To persuade her brother, Lucia jumped to her feet and loudly declared that precisely because she was a girl, she had the privilege of being spoiled and stubborn with their father. She recalled how the maid said that men usually indulge their daughters, so this was her only chance to accompany the inspection. Prince Roy was silenced by such a sharp argument, and the maids behind could not hold back and laughed at the princess's cleverness. When Roy asked what could convince their father to allow it, Lucia suddenly remembered a place with rare flowers that bloom only this season, and instantly decided to use the excuse to go for flowers and bring news of friendship with Alicia to persuade their father. Her good deeds needed to be done right now. Spirit made Roy only helplessly sigh at his sister's excessive zeal. Lucia went to the office of the 32-year-old King Isaac Robert Fatigi, who was discussing state affairs with Chancellor Carbahound. The young king was surprised to see his daughter arrive unannounced. Lucia politely greeted her father and apologized for coming at his busy time, but insisted she urgently needed to say something extremely important. Lucia proudly told her father that she had befriended Miss Alicia Furman, a very kind, though somewhat fragile girl, and giggling, asked permission to invite Alicia to the palace in the future. King Isaac smiled kindly and agreed, pleased that his daughter had finally found a true friend, but in a moment he felt that the little princess was surely hiding another cunning request. King Isaac asked if Lucia wanted him to bring her some souvenirs from the inspection, but she gathered all her courage, looked her father straight in the eyes, and said she wanted to go with him to see the world herself. She explained that she had grown up locked in the palace in the capital, and very much longed to see the everyday life of people and the distant lands of the kingdom. This brave proposal, Chancellor Hound reminded the princess that the inspection was a serious matter, not a walk, but Lucia was not confused and sharply replied that she wanted to go with her father to check if the people needed help and to help them herself. She pleaded pitifully, promised to be an obedient child, and King Isaac was torn between duty and fatherly love. Surprisingly, Chancellor Hound, whom everyone called the Ice Chancellor, unexpectedly took Lucia's side, saying that if she ever got the throne, the sooner she got to know the country, the better. Although King Isaac worried that 2 weeks in a carriage would be too hard for a child, the Chancellor assured that the princess was strong and would endure. In the end, the king gave in and allowed Lucia to go, but on the condition that she would not cause problems for the party. As soon as she got permission, Lucia rushed to Prince Roy and, overflowing with joy, threw herself into his arms to share the news. Roy was stunned to learn that even the cold Chancellor Hound had spoken in defense of his sister. Though a little worried when he saw Lucia's happy smile and determined eyes, he quietly understood that the fate of their family might begin to change thanks to this small step. Roy held Lucia tightly and promised that no matter what happened, he would always trust and protect her and Alicia. He thought that even if Alicia's words were just coincidence or fate, if they could change the future and save their father, he was ready to act. Lucia also asked her brother to take good care of Alicia if she and their father got into trouble. This moment, full of brotherly tenderness, was truly touching. And when preparations for the journey began, Lucia diligently studied with her mentor, Countess Asha Randall, to learn the customs and features of the regions they would inspect. It was then that the maid announced that Miss Alicia had arrived. Lucia prematurely ended the lesson with impatience and quietly decided to devote every moment before departure to tea with Alicia and preparing their secret plan so that Prince Lyle would not interfere. While they drank tea together, Lucia cast a spell that muffled the sound so no one could eavesdrop. Alicia asked if Lucia had ambitions for the throne, but the girl firmly denied it and insisted that her brother Roy was much better suited because Lyle was too arrogant and hot-tempered. Alicia admitted that in the old scenario Lyle was very serious, but abandoned his fiancée for another woman. Lucia instantly grabbed her hand and assured her that the current Alicia was completely different, not the one she hated so much, so the future would definitely be better. Lucia smiled and said it was because Alicia had befriended such a supportive princess like her. Everything had already begun to change. Time quietly passed as Lucia studied and met with Alicia. Meanwhile, she finished working on the hair ornament, soaked with extremely strong protective magic, and finally the day of departure for the fateful inspection arrived. At the carriage door, Lucius was met by Lady Marable, King Isaac's favorite, who would accompany the trip. Marable greeted her with a warm smile, calming the girl's nerves. King Isaac joked with his daughter, asking if she could stay awake during the long journey, and Lucia confidently replied, causing Lady Marable to laugh at their playful banter as the carriage began to roll. The 2-week inspection officially began. Lucia watched Lady Mariabelle and realized that she was very kind, although she lived separately in the palace. During the journey, Lucia proved to be a smart, curious child who constantly asked about people's lives and how territories were governed. King Isaac and Lady Mariable rejoiced. The little princess was not just traveling for fun, but sincerely eager to learn and become a capable heiress. When they were walking, Lucia noticed that Lady Mariable kept rubbing her belly and looked pale and weak. The girl anxiously asked what was wrong with her, and heard a shocking answer: Lady Mariable was pregnant. This meant that Lucia would soon have another younger brother or sister. The unexpected joy stunned her for a moment. Arrival of new life was something completely new. Lucia was so happy that she pinched her cheek to make sure she wasn't dreaming, and filled with the thought that she would soon become an older sister, bombarded her father and Lady Marable with questions about the baby, and even childishly asked if she could come visit the newborn after birth. Marable smiled and nodded in response. Lucia thought that although Lyle was also a younger brother, they lived in different palaces, so she had never truly felt what it was like. Lucia sincerely wanted to be a true sister, and gladly promised to personally plant beautiful flowers and give Lady Mary a bellflower so she could relax a bit during pregnancy. Suddenly she remembered Tutor Rendell's warning that some flowers have too strong a scent or ingredients harmful to pregnant women, so she decided to definitely consult the gardeners. While King Isaac stood nearby and looked at his daughter with a deep gaze, impressed that she noticed such small but important things affecting others' health. Lucia awkwardly apologized to her father for not remembering the exact names of the flowers to avoid because she hadn't brought a guidebook, and King Isaac fell silent, watching as his daughter walked ahead with Lady Mariable with a pensive expression. While the inspection continued, diligent Lydia parties were held in the towns, and at balls they met local lords. The busy schedule swirled in Lucia's head, but she remained radiant, knowing that every step brought them closer to the real test. Although Lady Marible's pregnancy was stable, the exhausting schedule of examinations clearly drained her strength. Lucia sat in the carriage and quietly understood why her father feared she would not endure the journey. Besides short stops for rest, they always had to maintain a royal posture in front of people, and seeing Marable dozing next to King Isaac, Lucia could not help but admire how she preserved a gentle smile by his side despite the fatigue. Suddenly King Isaac asked Lucia how she felt after having been in so many lands, and Lucia honestly replied that all the places shown to her seemed beautiful and splendid. When the king asked why she thought so, Lucia explained. Every time she tried to delve into certain areas, the guide stopped her and said, "Do not go further," and then she realized there are ugly corners that the local people in power do not want the royal family to see. King Isaac confirmed Lucia's suspicion. Behind those walls there really were poor slums, and he explained that the lords often show only prosperity so that everyone believes they govern well and do not need help. This seemed strange to Lucia, because if the truth were revealed, the kingdom could help and provide jobs for the poor. The king smiled thoughtfully at her innocent but responsible idea and announced that their last stop would be the flower field that Lucia had long dreamed of seeing. As soon as Lucia got out of the carriage, she held her breath before her stretched a dazzling, endless field of flowers, full of species she had never seen in the palace, and the local gardener and his wife warmly welcomed the princess and invited her to pick flowers to take home. Lucia eagerly asked about different flowers, and then unexpectedly inquired which scents could harm the health of pregnant women. The gardeners looked surprised for a moment. The gardener explained that many herbs, for example jasmine, lavender, rosemary, or mint, can cause irritation or be dangerous for pregnant women if used improperly, and Lucia listened carefully and took notes because she did not want to accidentally give Lady Mariable harmful gifts. She asked the gardener to prepare flowers with a gentle, fresh scent of lemon or bitter orange so that the expectant mother could relax, and also requested pots with plants protected by charms so they would stay fresh for a long time, and she could personally care for them in the palace. After Lucia chose the flowers, she helped Lady Mariable sit on a bench and gently inquired about her condition. Mariable, touched by the princess's warm care, admitted that sometimes she felt a bit selfish insisting on joining the inspection group during pregnancy. Lucia gently reassured her with sincere words, and a very intimate, sweet atmosphere settled between them. Lucia returned to the gardener and asked to be shown the medicinal herb beds because she remembered Alicia's warning about a pandemic that would unfold in 5 years. The gardener was surprised that the little princess was interested in herbs and led her to a modest garden. Lucia froze in amazement. The medicinal herb beds were tiny next to the bright flower field, and she immediately understood if a real pandemic comes, the current medicine supplies will definitely not be enough. The gardener explained that flowers are a real goldmine. They are highly valued and bought daily for decoration, so flowers are primarily grown, while medicinal herbs are used only when someone is sick. Demand for them is minimal, and only the wealthy can afford treatment. Lucia felt a prickly sadness at the thought that the poor would be the first to fall if the disease spread, and and a determination arose in her to immediately do something to change the production of medicines in the kingdom. Returning to the capital after a successful inspection, King Isaac noticed that Lucia was deep in thought, asked what troubled her about the herbs, and she anxiously explained. Gardeners are not interested in medicinal plants because few buy them, and she believed that if an infection broke out, the poor would be the first to die due to a lack of medicine. Then the middle class, and eventually even the nobility, would not be saved from disaster if there were too few medicines and they were held by the powerful. Lucia boldly proposed a plan to her father, to now use the kingdom's taxes to massively buy and stockpile dried medicinal herbs because they last longer than flowers, and the guarantee of royal sales would encourage people to grow more of them. At the same time, this plan would provide work for the poor, and people from the slums they would participate in growing and processing, creating a living, self-sustaining economic cycle that would protect us from future crises. When the inspection group was crossing a dangerous mountain pass, the ground suddenly shook violently. Lucia flinched, seeing the carriage tilt and fall freely off the cliff, just as Alicia had warned. Cracks and rumbling tore through the air, panic overwhelmed her, and the world spun around. The royal carriage plunged down the steep rocky slope, amid jerks and piercing screams of Lady Maribel. King Isaac, in panic, reached out to protect his daughter, but everything happened too fast. The carriage was swept off the road and engulfed by a blinding cloud of dust from the terrible landslide. At that deadly moment, when the carriage was about to be smashed over the abyss, Lucia gritted her teeth and vowed not to let her father and Lady Maribel die there. She gathered all her strength and activated the prepared protective magical stones. A dazzling energy flared and enveloped the entire carriage cabin a moment before it hit the ground. A loud explosion thundered, and a thick curtain of dust covered the crash site. Inside the wreckage, although the carriage was overturned, it retained its main shape thanks to the magical cushion surrounding it. Lucia gradually regained consciousness in the arms of her father and Lady Maribel, whispered asking if it was the end, and saw sparkling magical bubbles protecting them from being crushed by earth and stones. King Isaac reassured Lucia and Maribel that he was fine, but suddenly noticed something strange. He could not use magic to escape, and Maribel was no less shocked, which made Lucia realize the matter was very serious. The girl quickly pulled out a glowing magic stone and summoned light so that the three of them could see the cramped, debris-strewn carriage. Lucia understood that the slime magic she created really absorbed blows and allowed them to breathe under the heavy layer of earth and stone, but King Isaac discovered that a very powerful sealing magic was cast around them, preventing them from using their own spells. Lucia suggested crawling through the broken window and trying to break the seal, but Maribel firmly opposed. She was afraid that the earth outside would collapse again. King Isaac asked Lucia how much longer the protective magic could hold, but she did not know it was her first time with such a complex ritual. Lucia quietly suspected that the landslide was not accidental and someone deliberately arranged it to kill her father. As soon as she dared to risk going outside, a familiar voice from beyond the debris called the king's name, and everyone shuddered. Sir Ricardo Hughes, captain of the knights, appeared and anxiously asked about the king upon seeing the light shining among the rubble. King Isaac assured that thanks to Lucia's magic they were safe, but told Hughes that everyone was under a magical seal, and Hughes froze in surprise upon seeing the strange watery field enveloping the carriage that saved the royal family. He secretly admired how the little princess could create a miracle the world had not yet seen. Lucia awkwardly explained that it was her, slime, magic, and Hughes, and King Isaac only repeated the word in confusion. Hughes realized that the sealing magic worked over a long distance and that the culprit must have hidden anti-magic stones in clothing or around the carriage. King Isaac ordered Lucia to focus on maintaining the magical cushion, while Hughes dug through the earth and stones to pull them out. Lucia panicked and asked her father how they could remove the debris so that everything would not collapse again. The tension made her glowing magic tremble and become unstable just as fear almost prevailed, and she was on the verge of losing control. The light went out. Lady Maribel gently covered Lucia's eyes and quietly whispered for her to calm down. The warmth of her touch returned to Lucia, the focus needed to preserve the right to protect the family. In the pitch darkness of the buried carriage, Lady Maribel covered Lucia's eyes and whispered for her to calm down and imagine a stream of water pressing upward. Lucia murmured these words, and a memory surfaced of tea time at Alicia's, where her friend showed her a soft, pliable substance and explained that it was slime with amazing elasticity, and that if all the magic was poured into it, it could expand many times to protect people in an emergency. Welcome to the present. King Isaac and Lady Maribel suddenly noticed that the mucus magic around the carriage above had formed a slightly pointed cone, and they realized, if Lucia focused and pushed that pointed tip through the ground straight to the surface, it would be the perfect rescue signal for the teams searching from above. After that moment between life and death, Lucia was still stunned when a bright light flashed above the ruined place. King Isaac gently stroked his daughter's head and praised her for doing wonderfully, and Mariable approached, hugged Lusha, and said that the girl was truly talented. Meanwhile, King Isaac silently regretted having placed the burden of protecting the family on such a tiny child. Thanks to the efforts of Hughes and the rescue team, the royal family finally broke free from the rubble, but their brief relief was instantly shattered when a scout ran in panic and reported that many others from the inspection group had disappeared without a trace. King Isaac froze in shock upon learning that about a third of the people were missing, and Mariable anxiously wondered if everyone had panicked and fled upon seeing the buried carriage. Hughes reported that small search groups found no trace of the missing within the visible radius. King Isaac pondered and decided that his night watch was not trained to flee in such panic, so he ordered the squad to temporarily stop to count casualties and luggage losses, and Mariable took Lucia away to rest and recover after the terrible journey. While everyone was cleaning up, Lucia sadly realized that if she had known this, she would have taken more field equipment and food, and King Isaac came closer, asking to see the magic stone on her pin. He activated the appraisal skill to look into the enchantment inside, and was stunned to realize it was the work of Marquis Furman, but it was in Lucia's hands. Lucia enthusiastically explained that Alicia had suggested the idea of this mucus magic after hearing about summer water shortages in the flower garden, and added that Marquis Furman secretly hid a rescue spell in the stone, which both surprised and amused King Isaac and Hughes. To imagine that the Marquis had prepared such strong, serious equipment for a child. At the same time, the king hoped that the Marquis would soon bring reinforcements, guided by the stone's signal. Isaac gently stroked Lucia's head, explained that he believed the stone contained healing magic because the injuries were surprisingly mild, and asked if Lucia had ever measured Herman or tested its properties. Lucia cheerfully replied that she intended to do that only in the temple and according to all the rules. So King Isaac immediately conducted an appraisal right on his daughter, and stunned, exclaimed, "So that's how it is." Suddenly King Isaac blossomed with a smile, and to her surprise, lifted Lucia high, sincerely greeting her, and declared her the greatest achievement of the journey, asserting that the encounter with mortal danger probably most vividly awakened her hidden power. With eyes filled with proud amazement, King Isaac revealed to Lucia that she possessed the holy attribute, a rare and extraordinarily noble form of power. Lucia repeated these words in wonder, and her father firmly confirmed that she was fully worthy to become the holy maiden of the kingdom. The story told of the might of the holy attribute, a divine power that washes away curses from magical creatures, heals people and animals, and even restores life to withered land. Usually those who have this power become temple servants with limited abilities. But for a member of the royal family with such a huge reserve of mana as Lucia, she would be called a holy maiden or holy guardian, the highest symbol that appears only during great calamities. Although in peaceful times this power is rather honorary, the people love her madly. Lucia suddenly remembered how Alicia said that in the old text the holy maiden was the main heroine, and she began to worry that having such a status would greatly complicate her life. Although she was third in the line of succession, with the title of holy maiden she could be forced to take first place against her will, completely destroying the dream of a quiet, carefree life. Lucia immersed herself in thoughts about her mother from a count's family, who did not reach for power. She suspected that due to the lack of strong support from their side, her mother and brother Roy were simply bypassed despite their claims, and Lucia was troubled by the thought that Crown Princess Rouge, mother of Prince Lyle, would say all about this. She silently decided not to show her holy gift so as not to get involved in the power struggle, and only when King Isaac lifted her and asked how she was did it sharply bring her back to her senses. Lucia anxiously asked her father if it was really an accident. It was strange that the earth shifted without any rain. King Isaac thoughtfully replied that he did not know, and Captain Hughes reported. The landslide was so strong that it was impossible to say whether it was a natural phenomenon or the work of human hands. King Isaac ordered Hughes to keep Lucia's holy gift in absolute secrecy, because if it was a conspiracy to kill, the princess's life would be in danger. Hughes suggested using magic to erase the memories of everyone who was at the scene to guarantee safety, and the king agreed, warning Lucia not to talk to anyone, from which she noticeably sighed with relief and resolutely decided to keep the secret. Suddenly King Isaac asked Lucia what she felt about Lady Mariable, and Lucia joyfully replied that during this journey, the lady had turned out to be extremely gentle and warm, like a real mother, and sincerely confessed how much she loved her. The king asked if Lucia would be glad if Lady Mariable lived with them in the palace, and Lucia joyfully jumped up and immediately agreed, causing King Isaac to laugh at her excessive affection for his wife. After a long, adventure-filled day, everyone settled around the campfire in the forest, and Lady Mariable sighed with relief and was amazed, unable to comprehend how the trip ended in such a terrible misfortune just before returning to the capital. Lucia gently inquired about Mariabelle's health and heard that she was fine. They regretted that they should already be in the palace enjoying delicious food. Suddenly, Lucia took out a huge cake from her magical box and eagerly invited everyone to help themselves, and Mariable, surprised, asked if it was a gift in memory for Prince Roy. Lucia awkwardly admitted that she had bought too many sweets because they looked so strange, and she was afraid that the palace's head maid would start scolding her, saying that if she ate so much, she would become a fat pig. Her innocent confession and parody of the maid's tone made Mary ring with laughter, and the surrounding maids burst into giggles. Tasting the cake, Lucia also pulled out pies, and sighed it was a pity there was no teapot to serve them properly. Mariable was delighted. For the first time, she sat and ate casually together with the maids and knights right in the field. King Isaac stood nearby, watching his daughter eat heartily, and thought to himself that Lucia truly loved food madly. When everyone was enjoying a quiet moment, Lady Mariable suddenly heard a sound and exclaimed that someone was approaching. Everyone instantly became alert and looked toward the dark forest because a cry rang out, "Princess." "And your majesty." Lucia recognized the familiar voice and wondered if it was Marquis Furman. In a moment, Marquis Furman ran up, his face in tears, and seeing that they were alive, he shouted in panic to call the king and princess. King Isaac joyfully greeted Marquis Furman, immediately guessing that he had arrived as soon as he noticed the rescue signal. The Marquis sobbed with anxiety, but seeing everyone alive, sighed with relief, and was amazed at how the slime magic miraculously saved them. King Isaac thanked the Marquis, asked him to prepare the carriage as soon as possible to take them back, and inquired whether the Marquis had met any knights on the way. Marquis Furman shook his head and insisted that on the road from the capital, he had met no one. This stunned King Isaac and Lucia. Lucia began to analyze the situation and felt something suspicious even if the knights got lost. They could not just disappear without a trace. She tried to recall Alicia's old scenario about who would benefit if King Isaac died, but as far as she knew, neighboring countries were friendly, and there were no disputes over the inheritance because everyone considered Prince Lyle the sole heir. Lucia reasoned that usually Prince Roy would have renounced claims to become a duke, and she would have been married off elsewhere. This discrepancy between reality and what Alicia wrote gave her a headache because there were too many questions. While Lucia was deep in thought, Mariable called her by name, but fatigue and exhaustion from excessive use of magic caused her to faint amid the frightened screams of everyone, and the turbulent inspection journey ended. After a long loss of consciousness, Lucia slowly came to, felt a warm hand stroking her hair, half asleep whispered, "Mother," but when she opened her eyes, Lady Mariable was nearby, carefully caring for her and gently advising her to rest a little longer. Lucia whispered pitifully and asked the lady to stay until she fell asleep. This warmth reminded her of her mother, and Mariable smiled and agreed, saying she would gladly do this every time the girl needed. A few days ago at the estate of Marquis Furman, the night sky was torn by a bright alarm signal, and Alicia listened in panic. As her father told about the accident of the inspection group, she trembled with fear that the worst had happened earlier than expected and worried about Lucia and the royal family. Marquis quickly calmed his daughter, promised to immediately set out for rescue, and believed that the magical stones he had prepared would protect everyone, while Alicia through tears could only pray and hope that her dearest friend was unharmed. The flashback revealed that Alicia was the only daughter of Marquis Furman, spoiled like a flower in a glass greenhouse. At 5 years old, she fell and hit her head, and memories of a previous life as an office worker in Japan awakened in her. Then she realized that the world she lived in was the same autumn game she once played, and the radiance of the holy maidens, and with horror learned that she had reincarnated as a villainous minor heroine who was executed at the academy after repeatedly harming the main character. Frightened by cruel punishments like the guillotine or hanging, modern Alicia became extremely timid and withdrawn, completely unlike her former arrogance. Alicia decided that although in her past life she was an ordinary person without any power, she would definitely find a way to avoid that doomed fate. Just when the power of the scenario drove her to despair, Princess Lucia appeared. In the original game, Lucia was only a minor, unnoticed secondary heroine, but her words and strength shamed Alicia for cowardice, gave her the courage to face fate, and Alicia silently begged the heavens, "Do not take away this most important friend from me." Returning to reality after several days in a coma, Lucia learned with horror that she had slept for 7 days straight and, hungry, immediately demanded food. Juliana served the princess soup and explained that the king and Prince Roy were terribly worried when she did not wake up. Although the doctors said it was only mana exhaustion, Lucia panicked and tried to get up to find Prince Roy, but Juliana sharply restrained her. The doctor ordered absolute rest. Lucia complained that she felt fine, but they forced her to lie in bed and did not even allow her to bathe. Then Lady Mariable entered and sighed with relief, seeing that the little princess had regained her usual liveliness. Lady Mariable joyfully announced that after moving, she would officially become Lucia's magic teacher. Lucia beamed with happiness finally to study with the one she adored, but also worried about Mariable because she was pregnant. Mariable winked conspiratorially and said that precisely because Lucia had to hide her holy gift, she was the most suitable mentor at this stage. Just as a cheerful mood filled the room, Prince Roy burst in with panic on his face and shouted Lucia's name, followed by Alicia, who ran in sobbing uncontrollably, leaving Mariabelle alone. Mariabelle and Lucia stood stunned and did not know what had happened. Prince Roy, gasping for breath, apologized to Lady Mariabelle for his harshness. Alicia kept crying. Lucia anxiously asked what had happened, why she was so upset, and through tears Alicia choked out shocking news. She was informed that she would become the official fiancée of Prince Lyle. The announcement stunned Lucia. She blurted out, "What?" and could not believe that the engagement plan was still unfolding exactly as in their previous lives, despite all their efforts to change something. When Alicia was taken home to recover from her grief, Lucia and Lady Marable sat down to talk, and nodding to each other, admitted that through her tears, Alicia could not speak clearly. Marable wondered why she reacted so strongly to the engagement with Prince Lyle after all. For the nobility it was an honor, and Lucia firmly stated that Alicia hated Prince Lyle and only wanted to stay close to her father. She added that Lyle and Alicia were completely unsuitable for each other, and Lucia and Marable noted that Alicia seemed a much better match and closer to Prince Roy, judging by the care they showed each other. Lucia thought that if Alicia and Roy became a couple, she would always be close to her best friend, and Alicia would be happy. Marable smiled at the little princesses, sincerely concerned for her friend. The next day, King Isaac visited his daughter to give her a reward for saving everyone during the journey. Seizing the brilliant opportunity, Lucia boldly asked her father to cancel Alicia's engagement to Prince Lyle, and King Isaac was stunned and confused, unable to understand why a reward for his daughter should mean preventing someone's marriage. With a determined expression, Lucia begged that she did not want Alicia to be taken away, because after the engagement Alicia would have to attend lessons to become a princess, and they would have no time to play together. King Isaac sighed, wanted to comfort his daughter, but spoke the bitter truth. Lady Rouge, having learned about Alicia's ingenious slime magic, was favorably disposed towards her and firmly decided to choose her as Prince Lyle's bride. Just as the conversation stalled, the door suddenly slammed open, and an angry shout of "Father" was heard. Second Prince Lyle burst in with a sour face and loudly declared that he would never marry a woman like Alicia. Seeing Lucia, he spat cruel words, implying whether she was the one who was supposed to die, which angered King Isaac. The king sternly demanded that Lyle apologize to his sister for the rude remarks, but the stubborn youth replied that it was Rouge who said so. King Isaac was horrified by the queen's cruelty, which planted thoughts of death in the child, and sternly reminded Lyle that a king has no right to be without compassion for his relatives. Frightened by his father's anger, Lyle immediately fled the room, leaving Lucia stunned. Lucia watched as her brothers retreated, filled with anger, and exclaimed that she absolutely did not want Alicia to marry someone like Lyle, and King Isaac looked anxiously at his daughter and asked Lady Marable if she had any idea how to resolve this dilemma. Marable smiled gently and proposed a secret plan that instantly changed Lucia's mood from irritated to delighted, and the girl realized that it would not only deceive public opinion, but also legally free Alicia from the forced engagement. After arrangements with her father and Lady Marable, Lucia decided that only one thing remained to tell Alicia to calm her down. King Isaac promised to personally speak with Marquis Firmin and transfer the marriage agreement to a backup candidate to please Lady Rouge without tying Alicia to it, and Lucia herself pondered her sacred gift and worried that this power brought too many unwanted troubles. At that moment, Robin, Prince Roy's page, entered with a bright bouquet and teased the little princess, who had a solemn, maturely serious expression on her face. Lucia confessed to Robin that she fears this great power, that in trouble she might save herself first, not others, and does not know if she has enough courage to endure the political problems that may arise because she is a holy maiden. Robin looked at the princess with understanding and advised her not to carry everything on her own. She's still a child. He assured her that anxiety and fear are quite natural and that she has the right to rely on those around her. Robin gently smoothed Lucia's hair, smiled, and calmed her. The future is not frozen like a game script, it changes with every action, and Prince Roy, the Firmin family, Maid Juliana, and he himself are always ready to support her. Robin promised that if Lucia ever deviates or gets conceited, he will be the first to make a remark to her, like an older brother. Lucia felt great relief from his sincere promise and unwavering support of this faithful companion. The mood became playful when Robin teased Lucia as if she clings to adults like a child who refuses to go to bed. She blushed with shame, loudly objected, and drove him out of the room, and Robin laughed, joked a few more times about his lullaby voice, and left Lucia alone with her thoughts. The scene shifted to Alicia in the palace. With her head down, broken, she was sure her future was completely doomed, and she fell into despair because all attempts to change fate seemed futile against the power of the original script. While Alicia panicked, certain she would die tragically, Lucia calmly sipped tea and firmly assured that her friend would never die. Lucia explained Mariable's plan. Alicia is currently only a candidate for a bride, not an official fiancé, and Lucia analyzed that King Isaac summoned them only to calm Lady Rouge and create a safe cover so that Alicia could observe without being forced. Alicia was stunned, but hearing that everything was under control, a glimmer of hope appeared, and Lucia excitedly painted a bright future where Alicia would attend royal etiquette lessons with her instead of private lessons with Lyle, arguing that they are close friends. Studying together would look natural and would not arouse suspicion. Alicia was deeply touched by Lucia's caring protection, but still feared being exposed as an imposter. Lucia smiled radiantly and assured that as long as they are together, they can overcome any trial. Alicia stared into the void and decided, following Lucia's advice, to ignore Prince Lyle and the heroine if she appeared, to protect herself. She was overwhelmed with relief her father was still alive, and the arranged wedding was temporarily postponed, but suddenly Lucia's face changed, and she asked such a serious question that Alicia shuddered. Lucia wanted to know how Alicia had portrayed her in the future script, and whether Alicia really lived in her friend's memories. This embarrassed Alicia, and left her without an answer because she suddenly realized she had been so absorbed in herself that she neglected her dearest friend. Alicia confirmed to Lucia that although she was a secondary heroine, she still existed in her memories from the past life, and admitted that Lucia was supposed to be married off to another country in the future. News that relieved Lucia because at least a deadly end was not awaiting her. To better understand which way the wind blows, Lucia asked maid Juliana to bring paper and a pen so that Alicia could list the heroine's romances. Lucia was stunned to learn that the list included many handsome young men, including Prince Lyle, her brother Roy, and the sons of influential ministers. She found it absurd that one girl could fall in love with so many men at once, and Alicia anxiously explained that in this game, the heroine revealed secrets and saved the kingdom in exactly this way. Alicia continued writing and explaining that the plot needed a sinister secondary character who made the heroine's life harder. She said the world works as convenient for the author, which made Lucia laugh, but Lucia firmly stated that the world was already beginning to change thanks to Alicia's and her own actions, and encouraged Alicia. They needed to act together, implement counterplans, and change that dark fate moved. Alicia immediately agreed, and they whispered by the sofa over the new plan. The scene shifted to Lucia. She ran with all her might to meet Lady Mariable, who officially moved into the palace that day, and Lucia was filled with happiness at the thought that from now on she could be near the woman she adored every day. Mariable gently greeted the little princess, while the maids accompanying her politely introduced themselves. Seeing such a small retinue, Lucia asked if these were all the attendants she had brought from her mother's side. Mariable smiled and confirmed that these were her most trusted maids. When the group entered the palace, Lucia was a little worried would there be enough people to serve Mariable, and she suggested adding more assistants. Mariable tactfully declined, saying her maids were diligent and additional hands were unnecessary, allowing Lucia to use them when needed, and this made the girls see her as a refined and independent woman. But Lucia could not shake the thought whether such a small number would be enough for a pregnant woman, though Mariable's confident smile gradually calmed her. To begin her duties, Lady Mariable suggested practicing magic together while the rooms were being prepared. Lucia enthusiastically agreed and immediately sat down with her at the study table. Mariable took out an ancient stone tablet studded with small precious stones and asked Lucia to gently direct mana into the central sphere to test its properties, explaining that the surrounding stones represented fire, wind, earth, water, as well as holy and light, and they responded when they sensed the corresponding mana. Lucia nervously placed her hand on the sphere, and instantly a dazzling light flared up, enveloping the tablet. Mariable froze in amazement and sincerely praised Lucia when she saw that the girl not only had a holy gift, but also a barely noticeable affinity with wind, water, earth, and even shadow. And she took out a long glass vial with a small gemstone and asked Lucia to direct mana to raise it as high as possible and measure her mana reserve. Lucia concentrated, and in a moment the gemstone passed marks 15 and 16 and shot straight to 17 on the scale, while Mariable silently observed with a sharp gaze as a natural talent unfolded before her. Mariable smiled and said that Lucia's mana level had already reached 19, and with proper training, would definitely rise even higher. This news shocked Prince Roy standing nearby because he was 18 but only at level 12. Lucia rejoiced that she was stronger than her brother and curiously asked if their father also had all 5 attributes. Mariable confirmed that the king and the kingdom's archmage had the 5 basic attributes, but to simultaneously have a holy attribute like Lucia was extremely rare. She said that regardless of the attribute, the basic rules of mana control were the same, so training would not be a problem, and Lucia realized that besides the gods and the heroine from Alicia's memory, she seemed to be the only one with a holy attribute, so Mariable seriously reminded her that precisely because of this uniqueness she had to. She would have to study even harder to protect herself and the kingdom. Lucia resolutely agreed, because suddenly before her eyes appeared the image described by Alicia. Her brother Roy would fall ill and die in 5 years, and she quietly vowed to master water and earth, the elements that create miracle remedies, and could save him from that fatal disease. Lucia, with a radiant smile and determined eyes, promised to study diligently so that her magical knowledge would help tend the gardens and fields. Her true goal was to find all ways to change the future and protect her loved ones with her own hands. She decided that the first step was to plant a large garden of healing herbs to prepare for the approaching pandemic, and the section ended with the image of a little princess, with the unwavering will of a person who decided to change fate. Lucia recalled how yesterday she persuaded King Isaac to change Alicia's engagement status to a backup bride, and thought that since Alicia definitely hated Prince Lyle, this was even for the better. King Isaac was still worried that just this gift would be enough to arouse Lady Rouge's suspicion, so he decided to add another substantial present to divert people's attention, and Lucia at first thought of jewelry or dresses, but remembered the important plan with herbs and boldly revealed her desire to her father. Lucia ran out filled with excitement at Juliana's cries of joy after she asked her father for a small patch of land to plant healing herbs instead of luxurious gifts, convincing herself that the herbs they would need during the pandemic in 5 years had already been gathered during the recent inspection. She decided to find ways to distribute these medicines throughout the kingdom to prevent a disaster. Lucia dreamed of creating a panacea that could cure all diseases, but quickly dismissed this dream. It was too unrealistic for now. In the newly created herb garden, Lucia exclaimed excitedly to Alicia when she saw her friend in an extraordinary outfit. Instead of the usual heavy noble dresses, she wore comfortable men's trousers for gardening work. Lucia froze in surprise. It seemed to her that the image was fresh and full of energy. Alicia explained that because of working with earth and sand, this clothing was the most practical, and they both burst into happy laughter in their private corner of the garden. Alicia admitted that the clothes she wore were actually old and borrowed from Prince Roy, because in this kingdom, women almost never wear trousers. The two girls sat down to examine the valuable seeds and seedlings Juliana held, and Alicia enthusiastically explained how the combination of hazer grass with the fruit of catara gives an extremely effective remedy against epidemics. Lucia came up with the idea to grow many and store them in the pantry, but quickly realized that without special storage methods, large supplies of herbs would not last long. Lucia regretted not having many rare magical boxes to store all the herbs for the people. Alicia smiled and gave a simple piece of advice. If everyone had a magical box, tax reports would turn into chaos. People would hide the harvest and lie about losses to avoid paying taxes. Alicia's explanation, based on economics and society, left Lucia with eyes wide open in surprise. She had never thought about such complex, invisible aspects of life. Deep down, Lucia admired that Alicia truly carried the soul of an experienced adult. From afar, Miriable watched the two girls and smiled as if assessing their unusual maturity. Lucia suddenly felt humiliated by Alicia's lecturing and pouted a little. Alicia awkwardly apologized and admitted that, probably because of memories from a past life, she sometimes forgets that she has a child's body. She accidentally admitted that if you add up both her lives together, it turns out she is actually older than Lady Maribland. This shocked Lucia even more. Alicia panicked and covered her mouth with her hand, realizing she had blurted out something shocking, but Lucia quickly composed herself and, smiling, expressed admiration, secretly hoping that she would soon mature enough to. This is enough to accomplish great deeds, like Alicia. Alicia gently advised her not to rush. Childhood is the most precious time to learn and gain experience, and she insisted that a little more time before adulthood would better prepare them for future upheavals. Lucia pondered Alicia's words and realized that all her long efforts were preparation for a future without judgment and tragic endings. This quietly moved her, and she hoped that among all Alicia's plans, the time spent together would also be the important memory that her friend wanted to keep, and the two girls walked through the garden, filled with faith in a brighter future. The scene ended with Lucia and Alicia kneeling on the bare ground to begin sowing with magic. They decided to use the earth and water magic taught by Maribel to restore the soil and sow the seeds. Together they shouted 1, 2, 3, and placed their hands on the glowing magical circle in the ground. This began their plan to create herb reserves that would save the kingdom and change their fates. From a dazzling flash in the huge magic circle burst forth light that enveloped Lucia and Alicia and announced the stunning success of the spell to transform the soil. Lucia watched in awe as the once barren land trembled and instantly became fertile, marveling at how convenient magic was to so quickly transform such vast spaces. Alicia also looked confused at what had happened, thinking it was an irresistible force of a person with immense mana, and at that moment, a desperate cry of princess rang out from afar. Belchai, the gardener and caretaker of the herb garden hired by the palace, rushed to Lucia with a pale face. He anxiously asked if the princess was unharmed, and if such a large-scale spell had not harmed her, Belle feared it could have monodrained her, causing headaches. He felt dizzy, nauseous, and kept asking her to be careful. Lusha laughed with joy and jumped up to prove she was fine, also assuring him that Alicia was unharmed, which made Belle hide his face and sigh helplessly at the antics of the two girls. Lucia rubbed her temples and recalled that last time she really had a headache, but this time she felt completely fine. Interested, she asked Belle if too much mana could cause problems during farming, and Belle, embarrassed, explained that for ordinary people creating such fertile land was unthinkable. He said that with the amount of mana in Lusha, she could instantly turn a huge area of land into fields. Nearby, Alicia nodded she had just measured Lusha's mana, and this shocked Belle even more. The little princess's potential seemed limitless. Belle smiled warmly and said that with the wonderful land they had created, not only healing herbs, but also flowers and vegetables would grow. He was sure that the future harvest would impress and be something worth waiting for. Hearing this, Lucia was delighted and decided to secretly use magic to loosen all the soil on the territory of the Mariable Palace. She dreamed that the palace would be covered with bright flowers, and this made Alicia smile too. Belle began teaching the two girls the next steps, making raised beds for planting, explaining that alternating high and low plots would greatly ease care and harvesting. He detailed the sizes of the beds, about 20 cm high and handspan wide for comfortable work. He also said that raised beds drain well, and lowlands, depending on the crop, retain moisture. Lucia and Alicia listened attentively and began marking positions with sticks, driven by the enthusiasm of their new teacher. After a brief bustle, Belle suddenly warned the two not to overuse mana to artificially accelerate plant growth. This would disrupt harvest times. If everything ripened simultaneously in too large quantities, the market would be flooded with surplus and herb prices would fall. Embarrassed by this unfamiliar economic concept, Lucia asked Alicia if a price drop necessarily meant something bad, after which Belle changed the subject and inquired whether Lucia had studied currency units. When she answered no, he decided to give a short finance lesson right in the garden. Belle took several coins from a pouch, placed them on his palm so the girls could see, and starting with copper, then small silver, large silver, and the highest gold, explained that 10 copper 1 small silver, 10 small silver 1 large silver, and 10 large silver 1 gold. Platinum was the most special. 1 platinum equaled 100 gold. Alicia watched closely and noticed that even a young lady like her rarely saw platinum, while Belle insisted that ordinary people at best had only seen gold. Lucia, enchanted by the shine of the coins, realized that platinum was incredibly expensive and belonged only to great merchant houses or the king. She found it strange that these small metal discs could buy anything, and Belle laughed and said that 2 copper coins would buy a loaf of bread. He added that the average salary of commoners was about 5 to 6 gold per month. Lucia pondered. Although she lived in silk and velvet, it turned out she knew nothing of the real life of people who struggled daily to make ends meet. Suddenly, Lucia felt helpless. She only dreamed of a small garden with healing herbs to help the poor, and did not at all think about how those people would live and where to get the money to pay them. Only today did she realize that she had never dealt with money before. Alicia, noticing her friend's sadness, gently comforted her. Lucia was only 8, she still had plenty of time to learn about the world, and her sincere care for people was already priceless in itself. Belle expressed support and was glad to see the princess so sincerely concerned about her subjects. He believed that Lucia's perspective would become more practical when she understood the value of money and labor, and to test her thinking, he asked a tricky question: why does the crown collect taxes, and what happens if they are too high or not collected at all? Lucia quickly answered that excessive taxes make people suffer, and life would be better without taxes. Meanwhile, Julian's maid stood a little aside and guessed that the conversation would probably last a long time. Belche explained to Lucy that taxes pay the knights and maintain the royal court, and without them, there would be no one to defend the kingdom if another state attacked. Lucia listened and realized how delicate the task was to find a balance of taxes, so that they are not too high and do not pressure people, but also not so low as to threaten security. Belle suggested how to find the right level: go to the city and see with her own eyes how people make purchases. Alicia was impressed and exclaimed that this is exactly how they would find out the real prices. Belle praised Alicia for the correct answer and explained, when goods are scarce, prices jump because people start paying more to buy first, and if this repeats, the cost of the item increases many times. Lucia suddenly understood why for 5 years people could not afford medicine, not only because of the shortage of herb. Belle added that once Lucia understands currency fluctuations, she will be able to see where people are struggling and help the crown support them in time, and also emphasized that the desire to learn about the world is the true beginning for a princess. Lucia beamed and sincerely thanked Alicia and Belle for patiently explaining and comforting her, and was immensely happy to have such caring friends who attentively regard her feelings. Belle noticed that the mood had lightened and suggested everyone return to the main task preparing the beds for planting. The group gladly got to work, and Alicia's magic helped a lot, making everything smooth and fun. Belle was deeply impressed to see how the large garden beds were ready in moments without any magic stones, and admired the innate power of kings and nobility. Lucia asked with interest how soon after sowing the sprouts would appear, and Belle replied that the earliest is 3 to 4 days, the latest up to 10, but added that not 100 of the seeds sprout, usually about 80, and from this news Lucia glowed with impatience to see for the first time how green sprouts break through from the seeds. Belle further explained what thinning after sprouting is. Weaker sprouts are removed so that all nutrients go to the strongest plants, and Lucia felt a pang in her heart. It hurt her, because she wanted every seedling to live and grow strong. Julian's maid, who stood nearby, also noticed that this task would take quite a lot of time, and advised Lucy to be ready to rest. Although it seemed unnecessary, Lucy understood. This is a necessary rule in cultivation to get the highest quality herbs, and silently hoped that the seedlings would grow abundantly on their own and would not have to be pulled out. Suddenly Juliana wildly pointed to the ground and asked what was happening. Lucia and the others looked down and were stunned. Lush green sprouts grew from the ground just seconds after sowing. Throughout the garden the chorus "Poco Poco" sounded, and a bunch of grassy shoots suddenly rushed upward. Exploding wildlife group could not believe their eyes. For such an experienced gardener as Belle, this was a phenomenon beyond all expectation. Lucia asked Bella confusedly if ordinary herbs ever sprout so alarmingly fast. Bella trembled and replied that in his entire career he had never seen anything like it. Lucia began to worry. She was sure she had only used the basic magical techniques Marable taught her, and wondered if her sacred attribute power had affected the growth, accidentally accelerating the plant's development abnormally. Belle watched the sprouts grow as if driven by the wind and decided that at this rate they would be huge by tomorrow. He feared such rapid growth would ruin the market value and said they needed to check the weather. Do these herbs have different properties than usual? Alicia suggested a solution. Lucia could use her magical box to immediately gather and preserve all these herbs without letting them lose their quality. Lucia nodded. It was the only way to handle the huge upcoming harvest and not disturb life outside. When the group was discussing this, Alicia suddenly went pale and trembled, crying out Lucy's name in horror, and she flinched, asked what happened, and only then noticed that someone was coming to their plot. Belle and Juliana became alert and looked toward the forest when two figures ran up to them, and Lucia squinted and noticed that the one running ahead was not Prince Lyle, which intrigued her greatly. Who were these uninvited guests? Two teenagers ran up excitedly. Alicia whispered, trembling, that this was Lind Knight Captain, and Enchant, the son of the kingdom's supreme archmage. Lucia immediately recognized them as the heroine's two main suitors from Alicia's memories. And their unexpected appearance filled the grassy garden with tension and new surprises. Alicia panicked and clung to Lucia, whispering that in 10 years these two would become loyal to Prince Lyle and openly accuse Alicia, pushing her into ruin after they fall in love with the heroine. Alicia was worried why they were here right now, but Lucia, with a sharp look, quickly pulled herself together, barely smiled, and decided boldly not to hide, but immediately turn these potential opponents into allies. Lucia whispered to Alicia that if they manage to win them over to their side, the future will definitely change, and there will be fewer enemies. Immediately Lean ran up and suddenly grabbed Lucia's hands, scaring her, then anxiously bombarded her with questions. Who created this fertile land with such powerful mana? At that moment, Chant rushed to Lin and struck him hard on the head for his insolent behavior, sternly scolded him to look carefully at who was standing before them before behaving so rudely, and demanded that Lin immediately release the princess. Chance looked closely into Lush's deep blue eyes and instantly recognized a distinctive trait of the royal Fathija line in them. He was confused, fell to his knees, and apologized for his harshness for not recognizing the princess. Lean also bowed his head in fear. He realized he had spoken out of turn. Lucius smiled warmly and told them not to worry. She was wearing her brother's old garden clothes, so it was no wonder she was not recognized. She was very kind and had no intention of punishing anyone. This calmed everyone and made them quietly admire her generosity. Lucia asked their names with interest and received polite answers. Lynn Hughes and Chant Rockwell, and she immediately understood Lynn was the son of Captain Ricardo Hughes, whom she already knew. Then Lucia politely introduced herself as Princess Lucia and named her close friend Alicia Furman and the herbal garden caretaker Belle. When Chant heard the name Alicia Furman from the Viscount's house, he raised his eyebrows in surprise for a moment and looked thoughtfully at the girl. Noticing that Chant seemed to know about Alicia, Lucia asked further. Chant sincerely admitted he had often heard Prince Lyle mention Alicia's name, although she had not yet had an official social debut. Alicia blushed and thought that Lyle was probably speaking badly about her. Looking at Chance's expression, she realized that his attitude toward her remained cold and distant, and she assumed that Lyle had sown a bad impression of her among friends. Lucia insisted on finding out what Prince Lyle had said about Alicia, which made Lin and Chant fall silent. Lucia guessed it must be criticism. Lyle had never been kind to Alicia. Chant admitted that Lyle called Alicia an extremely proud, arrogant, and aloof young lady. Hearing these slanders, Alicia felt both sadness and anger and quietly lowered her head, while Lucia was furious at her brother's indifferent cruelty. Lucia firmly told the two young men that the Alicia she knew was nothing like Lyle's rumors, and directly asked would they believe gossip or their own eyes, standing before the real Alicia. Lin was the first to come to his senses, and admitted that Alicia did not look evil at all, but rather gentle and fragile. Chant also hesitated and quietly acknowledged that his first impression of Alicia had improved after meeting her in person. Lucia smiled with satisfaction. Her plan to shake their prejudices was beginning to work. When the atmosphere relaxed, Lucia warmly invited Lin and Chant to join the tea right in the herbal garden. Alicia, still a little hesitant, under her friend's care, pulled herself together again. Lin and Chant were very surprised and touched by the princess's friendly invitation, so they immediately agreed. Lucia hoped to use the tea gathering to ask more about the excess mana district that Lin had mentioned earlier. This could help her plans for developing the herbal garden. The group gathered around the tea table, attractively laid out with pastries and sweets. Lucia joyfully explained that these were special pastries she and the captain had bought during a recent inspection trip. Lin was delighted having tasted this cake for the first time. He sincerely praised its amazing flavor. A memory surfaced of Captain Ricardo Hughes buying cakes together with Lucia in the shop, which showed the close connection between the royal family and its courtiers. Lin happily recalled that his father rarely brought souvenirs home, but this time he came with a cake and the whole family came alive. He felt that Lucia's presence melted his father's sternness, and Lucia herself smiled happily because she felt she had brought a little joy to others. Meanwhile, Chant remained thoughtful and asked why the princess was so concerned about the sightseeing trip and the herb garden. Lucia decisively replied that she simply wanted to do things her own way to protect what was important to her, even if it seemed spoiled or selfish. Chant left distrust on his face and began interrogating Lucia about why she really wanted to visit Katina, a city known for rare flowers and healing herbs. Lucia casually explained that since she was engaged in growing flowers in the palace, she wanted to see species that could not bloom in the capital. Alicia sat sweating and realized that the information about the accident that nearly killed the king and the captain was completely hidden, so outsiders like Chant knew nothing. Lucia thought that personal inspections had revealed many truths to her that she would never have learned by sitting at home and sending others shopping. Lucia firmly stated that the biggest problem of the kingdom now was the acute and widespread shortage of medicinal herbs, due to which the prices of medicines had soared so high that people could not afford treatment even when sick. She insisted that this was an extremely important matter for the whole country, so she and Alicia decided to try experimental herb cultivation right on this plot. Lin was stunned and asked if it was true that the girls created the garden in one day. Lucia confirmed and explained that since she could not come every day, she trusted Belle's care during her absence. Lin panicked and asked how Lucia managed to create such a large artificial garden, and Lucia honestly replied that she used only the simplest earth and water magic she had learned. Lin hid his face in his hands and exclaimed that if his mother found out, she would faint from shock. He explained that the amount of mana needed to instantly cover and transform such a wide area would be incredible, by no means simple, as Lucia thought. Lin was also shocked because at first he thought Lucia was practicing potion brewing, and because of this, Lucia and Alicia asked in unison what kind of potion it was. Lin enthusiastically explained that the elixir was a kind of universal medicine, divided into 3 levels by strength. The first level restores damaged body parts, like the healing magic of the cathedral. The second heals most wounds and diseases that the third cannot handle, and the third is for ordinary minor injuries and ailments. Lucia thought that if first-level potions existed, the influence of the cathedral's magic would be greatly weakened, and Chant added that potions were very difficult to preserve for a long time, so the role of the cathedral remained important. Alicia, hearing this, immediately came up with a business idea and exclaimed that such things would definitely sell well. Lucian nurtured a desire to learn how to make both ordinary medicines and elixirs to prepare for the future, and noticing that Lin seemed knowledgeable, she herself was the first to ask if he studied them. Lin modestly scratched his head and admitted that although he had a considerable mana reserve, he was bad at controlling it, so he was currently learning under his mother's supervision, and Chant confirmed that it was his mother who taught Lin the basics of potion making. Chant reported that his mother, the Archmage of the kingdom, learned about the existence of the potion from other countries and is working hard to research it and produce it locally. Lin excitedly boasted that although they have the formula, they have not yet created the finished product, and Lucia curiously asked why, despite having the formula, they are failing, which made Lin blush embarrassedly and not know what to answer. Chant explained that, according to his mother's research, to brew the potion you need ingredients that grow where mana is abundant, and such mana is currently lacking in the kingdom. Lin enthusiastically assured that with Lucia's monarch garden, his mother's research would definitely progress quickly. He promised to bring this pastry as a gift and invite his mother to come support Lucia, and Chant, though not very enthusiastic, agreed that if it were possible to produce the potion, it would be very helpful. The mission to turn entire conquests into official allies went brilliantly. Everything was marked as completed, and Lucia and Alicia were delighted when Lin and Chant themselves offered to establish friendly relations and promised to support them. Lucia anxiously asked Chant if his mother would have difficulty because of the invitation. She is incredibly busy, to which Chant firmly replied that as soon as his mother learns about this strange land, she will come immediately, regardless of any busyness, and would even be angry if she were not warned in advance. Lucia blossomed with a radiant smile and thanked the two new friends for their passionate help, barely hinting to Lin and Chant that the garden must remain absolutely secret from Prince Lyle. Chant sighed and admitted that if Lyle found out, he would definitely come and cause trouble, ruining everything. Lin nodded and apologized for the immature behavior of the second prince, and a few days later, the action moved to the herb garden, where a lively, laughter-filled atmosphere prevailed. Chant's mother, Countess Randall, the supreme sorceress of the kingdom, was completely delighted when she saw Lucia's herb garden. She paced with a radiant face and exclaimed that she could not believe such a wonderful plot existed in the capital. Lady Mirabelle, standing next to Lucia, smiled and quietly remarked that Countess Randall was overly enthusiastic. Alicia was not at this meeting, but Lin and Chant stayed nearby, when suddenly Countess Randall, so excited by the running around, stumbled and fell to the ground, and Lin shouted, "Mother." Although the fall hurt her, she still smiled broadly and quietly whispered about the wonders of the garden to everyone's surprise. Countess Amanda Rockwell, clenching her hands in admiration, repeatedly exclaimed that Lucia's garden was a true wonder. She was stunned to learn that Lucia and Alicia created it using only the simplest magical rituals, and whispered with admiration that if a higher-level ritual were applied, the result would be even more amazing. Lucia, full of wonder, asked if the difference in rites could really so radically change the effect. The Countess nodded definitely and became even more interested in how much mana the little princess actually spent. Amanda explained that she learned about the potion while studying abroad in a land where people's average mana level was much higher than in this kingdom, and where they widely used natural lands that gather mana. When Lucia asked about this unfamiliar phenomenon, Lady Marable explained, "In Lastia, a country under the protection of dragons, mana is so dense that there are constant panic stampedes of herds and outbreaks of mana creatures, so life there is always on the edge of danger." Lucia froze in horror and anxiously thought about the people of Lastia, but Amanda reassured her they skillfully control mana and have elite combat abilities. She told that a Lastian diplomat invited her to study there, and it was during that study that she began researching potions. Amanda passionately explained that if people could restore lands that accumulate mana and keep mana beasts out, they could create incredible gardens filled with mana. She claimed that herbs in such soil would absorb mana and grow extraordinarily fast, becoming the main ingredients for potions, and Lady Marable stood nearby smiling because Amanda spoke so enthusiastically that she completely lost track of time. Lucien noticed how Chance silently observed with a thoughtful expression, called him over, and asked with interest if he was learning magic from Lady Marable just like she was. Chant nodded and gave a subtle, knowing smile that made Lucia momentarily confused. Suddenly, from afar, the voice of Belle the gardener sounded, bringing everyone back to reality, and Lin quickly noticed that Belle seemed to have been waiting a long time to say something to Lucia. Belle approached with a serious expression and admitted that he actually already knew about similar fertile plots, but gardeners simply called it soil loosening. He explained that he had never heard the magical term, mana surplus zone, so he was very embarrassed by all the reactions. Belle said that sometimes, when flowers needed to be grown quickly for delivery, many gardeners combined their mana to speed up growth, and Lucia, hearing this, understood why Belle showed no surprise. Earlier, she was impressed by how quickly the seedlings sprouted. Countess Amanda was stunned. What she had worked on so carefully turned out to be ordinary, for common Piplesh reproached herself, saying that the difference in knowledge and language between classes creates futile gaps in understanding. Marable smiled and said that thanks to Lucia, two previously separate points of knowledge finally connected into one straight line. Lucia blushed with embarrassment. It turned out she had unintentionally become a bridge for an important discovery, although she felt she had done nothing extraordinary. Lucia stood among circles rippling like waves after a stone thrown into water. This image showed that even a random act of a little princess caused a great change that spread throughout the kingdom. Amanda said that Lucia's brave work in the garden opened a new page in the study of magic and medicinal plants. Lucia happily asked Chant if she could consider this a good deed she had done, and Chant smiled, confirming that for his mother it was truly the most wonderful thing. Lucia shone and did not forget to thank Lean for his diligent help. Chant, though remaining reserved, looked at Lucia more warmly and with greater respect, and Lean, happy with the feeling of usefulness, eagerly predicted that in half a month they would gather the first harvest of herbs and could start experiments with potion making, after which the boy curiously asked if Lucia planned to carry out the entire process herself. Lucia boldly announced this, and Chant suddenly felt uneasy at the thought of her next intention. As expected, Lucia, with an innocent smile, said she would test the medicine herself, deliberately inflicting a small wound, and this statement stunned everyone present due to the recklessness of the little princess. Chant instantly became angry and shouted to stop Lucia. A royal person must not harm themselves under any circumstances. He demanded that she immediately change her mind, and because of this, Lucia curled up in fear. Noticing the tension, Lin instantly suggested another option: not to sell to everyone at once, because this could raise doubts about the quality, but to look for a buyer who would never refuse good medicine. He enthusiastically added that the ideal first clients are the Order of Knights of the Kingdom, who daily need large supplies of healing herbs. In the herb garden, Lin eagerly proposed to take the new medicine to the Knights' order for testing, explaining that for Knights, bruises and scratches are common, so they would not refuse good medicine, and the tree, on the contrary, would be very grateful. Lin added that if the medicine proves effective on knights from common families, the medicine would quickly become talked about throughout the capital. Lucia and Chant listened attentively and agreed that this was a very smart move, and suddenly a loud shout of "Hey!" interrupted the conversation. A pair of elegant shoes slammed on the ground, crushing dry twigs with a sharp crack as a hurried foot. And footsteps approached. An angry shout of "You all!" rang out, frightening Lucia, Alicia, and Lin. All three sharply turned around in shock. Prince Lyle appeared with a frowning face, pointed at the group, and shouted why they dared to gather in such a place, trade oil and engage in useless affairs, and behind him hurried a servant shouting, "Your Highness." Lucia screamed her brother's name in horror and despair, seeing Lyle mercilessly trample her herb beds. Chance calmly stepped forward and reminded Lyle that he himself said a few days ago there was nothing left to do, and ordered Lucia's group not to come before him. Chant continued, sharply and logically asking Lyle why he said it was unnecessary, but came here himself. Lucia silently admired this apt argument that left Lyle speechless and angry. Chant also reproached Lyle to calm down. He was standing before the ladies, and demanded that if Lyle came to the palace, he at least should have warned him. Lyle angrily retorted to Chant, asking by what right he led these people, while Lucia stood silently, stunned by her brother's absurdity. Coldly crossing her arms, Lucia reminded Lyle that he himself said they were unnecessary, so taking them somewhere was not a problem, and decisively stated that whoever he was, he had no right to limit others' actions. Lyle shouted in despair, "I am the heir to the throne." Lucia looked piercingly and sharply replied, "So what?" stunning him with the question of whether he really thought that with his character, just because he was first in line, the throne would easily come to him. Lyle panicked and countered that Mother Rouge assured him he would definitely become the next king, so it must be true, and Lucia cooled his hopes, reminding him that King Isaac was not as lenient as he imagined, and that Lyle loved mischief more than learning, and had not cultivated proper manners. Lucia sarcastically asked what Queen Rouge would say if she found out that the son she had pinned her hopes on was actually inept and knew nothing about science or social manners. Lucia continued, saying that Queen Rouge could still have children, and if the younger brother turned out to be more capable, Lyle's position would instantly be threatened, and she directly asked, "Does this world need a king like you?" This sharp remark made Chant intervene. She feared Lucia had crossed the line too far. Lyle, shocked, became so upset that he cried and shouted to his sister, "Don't pity me like that," tears streaming down his face. Lucia said firmly that she was only stating the obvious. In royal families, the throne often goes to the more outstanding heir at his fate, a harsh truth that those born in the crown, like these two, must face. Lyle sobbed that he was not a fool, accused Lucia of stealing his lean and Chant, and because of that everything went wrong, then cried, called his sister evil, and ran away, and Lucia angrily shouted after him when he trampled her garden beds again. Watching Lyle retreat, Lucia sadly whispered, "What cruelty." She knelt down and gently hugged the trampled shoots of medicinal herbs, pained by the thought that the plants meant to heal people were destroyed senselessly. Lin and Chant, depressed and full of remorse, came to apologize, thinking they were the ones who angered the prince, but Lucia gently reassured them. It was not their fault. Lyle himself must take responsibility for his recklessness, closing this chapter with the little princesses and thoughtfully looking at the ruined garden. Countess Amanda hastily apologized for getting carried away in the conversation and forgetting what was happening. She grimaced seeing Lucia's trampled herbs, but quickly composed herself and suggested the princess use earth magic to save them. Although Lucia hesitated because she only knew the simplest rituals, Amanda smiled encouragingly and insisted that in such moments simple magic works best. Under Amanda's patient guidance, Lucia knelt down and gently placed her hands on the withered shoots. Round the broken branches, a magical circle played as the girl poured mana into the earth grain by grain. Amanda reminded Lucia to keep a steady rhythm and feel how the energy gathered in the roots of the plants, and immediately a quiet boko sounded a sign that the herbs were coming back to life. Lucia caught her breath and exclaimed with joy when the crushed grasses suddenly straightened and fully recovered as if nothing had happened. Amanda smiled and explained that even a simple spell can heal plants if the mage has a lot of mana. She was glad to have helped the princess. Belle was also touched and grateful to the Archmage's teachings. Now he knew an effective way to save the harvest after storms or animal attacks. Amanda and Belle eagerly continued discussing how to regulate mana most effectively for the growth state of each plant. Lucia could only observe and think about how Belle truly was eager to learn. Suddenly the mood changed. A young man approached the group, apologized for his abruptness, and boldly introduced himself as Jill Hound, son of Chancellor Hound. Jill's arrival confused Chant, and Lynn a little. They explained that he insisted on joining even though he was not invited. Lucia froze in surprise when Jill Hound appeared. She suddenly realized that all 4 suitors of the heroine from her past life had gathered around her. Secretly she sighed with relief Alicia was not there, and she did not have to face that awkward situation. Seeing the 4 attractive young men standing nearby, Lucia curiously asked if they usually stayed so close to Prince Lyle, and Jill looked away into the distance and awkwardly began to evade the answer. Chan advised Jill to be honest with the Princess. Lyle's true nature cannot be hidden forever. Jill sighed and said that despite all their efforts, Prince Lyle often skipped lessons under the pretext of physical exercises. She recalled how he ran away shouting, "I'm going to train," and his attendance was increasingly suffering. This clearly indicated that Lyle never truly practiced fencing. He was simply running away from books and etiquette. Lucia sighed with irritation when she realized why her brother behaved so impulsively at the tea party. Lucia anxiously concluded that if this continued, even Lyle's right to the throne would be at risk. Jill and Chant agreed that Lyle's cruelty and laziness, if not corrected, would soon bring serious diplomatic problems to the kingdom. Lean was about to speak up, but Jill instantly covered his mouth to prevent any unfortunate words from escaping. They understood that as young nobles they needed basic skills in verbal etiquette and dance, and for a member of the royal family, this was even more mandatory. The group froze, looked toward the garden, and nodded. Although everyone was moving at their own pace, Lyle's condition was not just slow learning, but a much more serious problem. Lucia insisted that she must tell the king the whole truth. She could not simply close her eyes to her brother's decline. She once again recounted Lyle's challenges and harsh words, causing Jill and Chant to blush, sweat, and cover their faces in shame for the future lord, while Lucia herself decided to prioritize finishing the rest of the healing work for now. Lucia decisively told her friends to go. She would take care of the rest. Belle also advised the princess to return and rest because she had spent a lot of mana reviving the plants. He assured them that he would handle the rest using the allocated magic stones and the little tricks the Archmage had just taught him. Belle smiled kindly and asked Lucia to entrust the garden to him, saying that it was the royal gardener's business. Moved by Belle's devotion, Lucia gave him a magical stone she herself used, and strictly asked him to handle it very carefully. Belle treasured the gift and promised to keep it as his most precious treasure, closing this page with an image of Belle Chai, who happily and proudly smiled at his work, a true florist who wholeheartedly dedicates himself to the growth of the garden and the trust of the little princess. The scene shifted to the Florist's Guild in the city of Katina, where the florist gently tended to a potted plant and explained that florists grow and trade flowers and medicinal herbs, and unlike gardeners, they are not just caretakers of plots but true plant specialists. Belchai stood confused by the guild doors upon hearing the news of the royal appointment of the court florist. Belle's father and another man argued heatedly that although she was young, the attention of the royal family was a serious matter, and they feared that if Belle made a mistake with the royal plants, the consequences would be terrible. But Belle recalled the image of Princess Luss and thought to herself that she did not look like a fearsome representative of the royal family at all. Returning to the present, Lucia beamed as she introduced herself and her friend Alicia Furman Bell, and their noble presence so impressed Belle that he was flustered, fell to his knees, and stammering, begged them to raise their heads. He could not accept such formal honor from representatives of the royal family. Lucia smiled brightly and explained that she had invited Belle here as her teacher to learn how to care for the medicinal garden, so her gesture of respect was quite natural, and this left Belle stunned with his mouth open. Still stunned, Belle exclaimed that he was just an ordinary gardener and would not dare accept the title of teacher from a princess, while nearby Alicia asked him to calm down and insisted that Lucia explain everything clearly from the very beginning so he could understand the situation. Lucia joyfully and eagerly invited Belle to sit at the tea table and talk, while Belle stood under the heavy pressure of the nobles, even though Lusha was so open and friendly. Lucia admitted that although she had cared for flowers before, it was the first time she had planted medicinal herbs herself, so she truly considered Belle a skilled teacher. She added with a smile that he should not worry about rank, she did not pay attention to it. When the tension subsided a bit, Juliana smiled and placed a sheet of paper on the table, and to Belle's surprise, Lucia decisively declared that it was their engagement contract, and Belle felt that he would find no ally here. Belle picked up the contract and, confused, read it. It stated that Lucia and Alicia promised to be polite students and never use their royal status to threaten or insult the florist Belle Chai during lessons, and Belle trembled when he asked if the princess had really written those lines herself. Lucia proudly confirmed and explained that, not wanting to be rude, she used the contract to protect Belle's rights, and added that all palace gardeners worked under similar fair contracts. The story shifted to Belle's thoughts when he officially became the master of the medicinal garden. At first, he thought the princess was just temporarily interested and would soon give it up, but it turned out to be the opposite. He increasingly saw Lusha and Alicia in the princess's old dresses, happily digging the earth, pulling out weeds themselves, and endlessly asking questions about plants to a simple boy like him. Belle smiled. The royal family was not at all the arrogant and cruel one people talked about. On the contrary, he now eagerly awaited his daily meetings with the princess in the garden, and silently comparing them, he felt that Prince Lyle more resembled those bad traits usually attributed to kings. In the dim library, Lyle collapsed onto the sofa, full of resentment, when a mysterious man approached him and asked what had taken away the prince's usual composure, after which Lyle burst out shouting, "What do you mean, saying that I am like me?" The boy howled and complained that he had no talent and had fallen into despair because he believed that Lucia had taken away both Chant and Lin from him. Lyle was sure that, despite everything, Lucia would soon become his replacement as heir. The man standing nearby listened attentively and smiled slightly when Lyle mentioned that girl. The mysterious man with pale blonde hair quietly asked Lyle if that girl was the third princess. He assured Lyle that a princess of legitimate birth could never replace the prince as their father's heir. Lyle screamed in despair, "What do you know?" The boy tearfully recounted how the king rewarded Lucia but never gave him anything similar. Shadowy figures of guards stood behind the man, completely motionless. The man thoughtfully said that such a difference was indeed unbefitting her position. Memory flashed, young Lucia innocently playing with chickens, while they said the third one who does not know her place. Lyle clenched his teeth, picked up those words, and insisted that Lucia did not know her limits. The mysterious man extended his hand as if calling to action, and hinted that if they were troubled by this discrepancy, they would intervene to teach the princess a lesson. He decisively told Lyle that only the prince truly deserved the throne. The scene split in half. The mysterious man with a sinister smile asked the prince to give him time to deal with the third one, promising to give Lusha advice on how to live according to her rank. And opposite stood the figure of Belchai under burning roses. He held a magical stone and looked determined, as if the whole world was preparing for a dramatic clash between dark plans aimed at Lusha and the loyalty of her close friends. After Prince Lyle acted aggressively in the medicinal garden, a letter arrived at Lucia's palace. Archmage Amanda and 3 young men Chant, Lin, and Jill asked her to visit, and Lucia almost did not doubt that it was definitely connected to Lyle's impulsive stunt yesterday. She decided to arrange a tea reception together, with Lady Mariable to welcome them, and did not forget to write to Alicia in advance asking her not to come that day to avoid unnecessary trouble. The tea party took place in the garden under the open sky. Lady Mariable smiled gently and greeted Archmage Amanda and the 3 polite young men, who bowed in response. Amanda sincerely said that it was an honor for her to be invited to a ladies' tea while reading a spell. Lin and Jill stood straight and dignified. Like young nobles, Maria Bell was very pleased by this, and she invited everyone to sit down. Lucia took the initiative and asked whether to start with magic lessons or private matters, and Amanda immediately yielded to the 3 young men and suggested Lady Mariable take a walk with her in the garden to discuss the plan for Lucia's magical training. When the adults dispersed, Lucia looked Jill straight in the eyes and quietly asked if they had come specifically to talk about Prince Lyle. Jill nodded seriously in agreement. Jill, the hound dog, panicked and fervently begged Lucia to postpone the message to King Isaac about Lyle's behavior. He was afraid it would be seen as a failure in their care. Lucia raised an eyebrow and asked why. Suspecting they were afraid of responsibility, but Jill firmly denied this and insisted they also felt guilty, believing that Lyle did not yet understand the importance of etiquette and training, but would soon realize it. To which Lucia laughed coldly and asked, "Soon when?" Lucia decisively stated that while those around Lyle like Jill and Chant had learned to keep a calm appearance, Lyle himself froze in place. She sharply asked if Lyle had really done anything during this time, or just lived in dreams of a bright future without making any effort. Lucia advised them to abandon the illusion that everything would sort itself out, and for a moment lowered her eyes, admitting that she herself had only recently begun to learn how to behave properly, so she had no right to speak ill of others. Lin naively asked why Lucia said that. She smiled slyly and replied, "Because I am the third." Lucia bitterly recounted how matters of power and labor were decided in the court. She had no patrons, and because she was a girl, she was often overlooked, while Prince Roy, though second in line, had bathed in privileges since childhood and underwent strict air training thanks to influential support behind his back. Memory surfaced of how young Lucia was teased by Prince Roy, and his page Robin. They tied a blindfold over her eyes and made her guess who was who. Lucia naively guessed Prince Roy only by his warm voice. Roy laughed and praised his sister, and then the very young Robin turned out to be the one teasing her, and the atmosphere was warm and full of brotherly tenderness. Roy gently tousled Lash's hair and explained to her the relationship between him and Robin. Robin was a servant learning to imitate the prince's manners to someday assist him. Lucia naively asked if she could imitate Roy as Robin did, and Roy smiled, saying that was probably inappropriate. Then he looked at his watch and regretfully said he had to go study and could no longer play with his sister, which clearly upset Lucia, seeing her brother constantly busy with books again. Lucia thought to herself, although Roy had formally studied the art of ruling from a young age, no one had raised her as a princess despite her age. She had never been properly taught etiquette. She recalled how Prince Roy, not wanting to see his sister abandoned, directly appealed to their father to improve her situation, and thanks to this, Lucia began to receive attention. But by that time she was already used to chasing chickens and playing in the dirt. The court page Robin considered her a tomboy, and the chapter ended with her anxious reflections on the cruel inequality in the royal family. Jill lowered her head in shame because of Lucia's harsh words and admitted that her strict etiquette training under Countess Randall was a consequence of the royal family neglecting the third princess. Lucia recalled Robin and Juliana's remarks about the incredible effort she made to achieve this posture, then looked Jill straight in the eyes and firmly stated that whatever the reason, Prince Lyle must be punished for his faults. Lucia noticed that Lyle was too spoiled and overconfident, believes he is always right, often explodes, and makes life around him unbearable. She said that if he continues to live in comfort without effort, he will never rise above others, and compared him to Prince Roy, whom everyone at the Academy respects and considers the main contender for the throne. Jill anxiously asked if Roy could also be upset about the order of succession, but Lucia firmly denied it and insisted that neither she nor her brother wants the crown. Lucia took a sip of tea, and Kamlai said that since she and Roy do not seek the throne, their interests actually coincide with Lilesh wants Lyle to strive to become a worthy heir to the throne, because if he remains incapable, villains will appear who will exploit him or turn him into a puppet to rule the kingdom. Lucia was terribly afraid that those people would go so far as to remove the decent one herself, her brother Roy, or guards like Jill and Chant. She turned to Jill with a question that chilled the blood. At his current level, Lyle already clearly knew how to distinguish who among the people around him was good and who was evil. Jill fell silent and pondered because he knew the answer was definitely no. Chance, who was sitting nearby, was also thoughtful, sipping tea. Jill sighed with regret and admitted that he was partly to blame. He had indulged too much and had not decisively curbed Lyle's bad habits from the very beginning. Suddenly the conversation became noisy. Lean and Chant were heatedly arguing about who should bear the main responsibility for the prince's corruption, and Lucia only gave a crooked smile and advised them to sometimes let off steam, it makes the soul lighter. Lucia watched the fierce dispute between the two young men and thought that they seemed to have accumulated so many grievances that this tea time became an outburst of everything they had kept inside. She realized that this was probably far from the end, so she shifted her gaze into the distance, where Lady Mariable and Archmage Amanda were still leisurely strolling and peacefully conversing, and Lucia smiled as she handed Lin another cookie to calm him down a bit, which made the boy blush and thank her. Lin greedily savored the pastry and asked Lucia if she liked sweets, then admitted that his father, the Knight Commander, hated sweets and believed that men should not eat treats, so the cake Lucia gave him earlier became extremely valuable and rare for him. Lucia smiled and called it an old-fashioned belief, saying that men can quite enjoy sweets. She gave the example of her brother Roy and King Isaac, who adore treats, and from this, she suggested that this weakness might be hereditary. Lean was surprised that even the king liked sweets. The king admitted that his mother also adored them, so probably the taste came to him from her, and Lucia joked that Lean was a funny mix of a father who does not like sweets and a mother who adores them. Lucia advised Lin, if he ever bakes at home, make a less sweet version for his father so they can enjoy it together. Lin was momentarily worried that his father might scold him for this, but Lucia insisted that sweets bring happiness, especially when shared with loved ones. Lucia kindly explained to Lin how to ask the cook to prepare treats to suit his father's taste. Lin was deeply grateful to the princess for her care and promised to try the advice, while in thought Lucia recalled Commander Hughes, a strong man who was often on business trips. She decided that maybe he simply did not know what his son liked, hence the distance between them, and the fact that the son turned to her to confirm his preferences was the first step toward bringing father and son closer. Lucia looked brightly at Lin and asked if he really loved his father. Lin smiled happily and replied that he deeply respected him but still doubted whether he could ever become as great a knight as his father. She teased Lin, "Weren't you going to follow the path of the supreme magus Amanda in magic?" He blushed and began seriously considering his future path. Lin admitted that the choice between the path of a knight father and magic under the Archmage's guidance was still too difficult for a child, and Lucia silently thought that perhaps their conversations with the father were not deep enough, then felt relieved that the commander of knights survived the accident, because if he had died without saying the last word, Lin would have been tormented by those doubts forever. The leader closed with a reliable look of Lucia into the future of the new friend. She decided that when you have such a person as Lin's father, with whom you can speak sincerely, you must speak frankly, and suddenly an idea struck her. "Doesn't the image of a magic knight sound cool?" she asked Lin. He repeated the word emptily, and Lucia enthusiastically explained that it is a warrior who knows both sword and magic, and she also wondered if many knights in the order already use magic. Lin explained that in reality everything was not quite as Lucia imagined. Training to strengthen the body was mandatory, but most knights used magic only for rescue or support, for example, water magic to extinguish fires, or wind and earth to chase thieves. Lucia suddenly caught herself thinking that she had always considered combat magic exclusively the business of the magical core, and had never thought deeper. She advised Lian that if he had enough mana, it was worth trying to combine abilities to respond flexibly in a crisis, and Lian began to agree with her idea and decided to try. But suddenly, the atmosphere tensed again. Jill and Chant continued to quarrel, and both sighed with irritation. It was then that Lady Marable and Archmage Amanda returned from their walk. The lady smiled and asked Lucia if the meeting with friends was already over, as they had been walking for a long time, and Lucia with the company immediately stood up and greeted them. Lucia mentally noted that Chant and Jill really did not want Lady Marable to find out about the previous quarrel, so they pretended to be outwardly calm. She turned her gaze into the distance and suddenly saw a thick column of black smoke rising against the clear sky. She froze, pointed at it, and anxiously asked everyone what that strange column was. Lin and Jill also looked in the direction Lucia was pointing. She, worried, thought that perhaps a large fire had already broken out. Jill decided that the smoke seemed to come from the crowded quarter, but still within the castle. Lucia suddenly turned pale and broke out in a cold sweat when a terrible thought flashed through her mind. Lucia held her breath, although the direction was near the market. It clearly lay within the palace grounds, and worse, right where her beloved herb garden was. The memory of yesterday's incident with Lyle frightened her. She feared her brother might have done something even crazier, and Lin shouted in alarm when he realized the princess's herb plot was in danger. Lucia panicked and shouted that Belche would definitely be in the garden tending the plants at that time. She hurriedly turned to Archmage Amanda with a request. Could she use long-range magic to precisely locate the source of the smoke? Amanda instantly uttered a spell and confirmed that she clearly saw the scene. Archmage Amanda released a beam of light magic in the form of a magical bird to observe from above, and Lady Marable anxiously asked why there should be a fire if a florist was supposed to be there. Lucia noticeably choked up as she reminded them that Lyle had come a few days ago to smash the garden, and she had a grim suspicion that this was a petty revenge against her. Mysterious man with a sly smile surfaced in her lavish imagination, confirming the suspicion that someone was deliberately attacking her through Lyle. Archmage Amanda, stunned, reported. The flames had engulfed the work hut right next to the pavilion in the garden, and worst of all, she saw no trace of Belche in her field of vision. Lucius shouted to the servant Juliana to immediately prepare the horses, because she could not sit idly by while her garden and friend were in danger. Despite all fears, the little princess rushed off with all her might, her heart crying Belle, and a burning determination to save her true friend, the florist. Lucia dashed away despite others' attempts to stop her. She could not calm down until she was sure Belle was safe. She loudly declared that she was fine because she carried a magical stone for protection, and seeing her determination, Lin eagerly demanded to go together to help, and Chant and Jill instantly decided to follow to protect the princess. Archmage Amanda anxiously watched the children depart, because preparing horses or a carriage would take too long, and she was troubled by the thought, what could a child like Lucia do against this great fire without timely help? Juliana immediately sprang into action, helped Lucia hitch up her heavy skirts and securely fasten them so she could move more freely, and assured that this would make it easier for Lucia to mount the saddle and reach the place faster. At that moment, a worried servant ran up, leading 2 ready horses, and reported that everything was prepared. Lucia thanked Juliana, skillfully mounted the saddle with the help of the servant, looking extraordinarily determined and brave. The assistant warned Lucia to be very careful. Horses are easily frightened by fire, so he advised tying the horse at a safe distance before approaching the flame. Lusha firmly replied, understood, and to Lin's surprise, pushed her horse forward. Chant, Jill, and Lin could not believe their eyes. They exclaimed upon seeing such a young princess riding so skillfully, and 3 young men rushed after her so as not to fall too far behind. Galloping at full speed, Lucia silently thanked the training with the courtiers that had prepared her for this extraordinary moment. A gentle smile of Belle flashed through her thoughts and squeezed her heart with anxiety. She told herself that Belle had to wait and prayed that he would remain safe amidst the sea of flames. As she approached, Lucia saw in horror a thick black column of smoke and flames ravenously devouring her beloved herb garden, and instantly jumped off the horse and rushed to the fire, continuously calling Belle, her voice tightening with fear. She looked around in panic, but her florist friend was nowhere to be found, which only intensified the worst fears in her heart. Lucia realized that the fire had broken out in the workshop and threatened to spread to the surrounding forests if not extinguished immediately. At this crucial moment, she decided to use the enhanced slime, a magical stone she always carried with her. Pressing the stone to her palm, Lusha poured all her immense mana into it with fierce determination to extinguish the flames and save everyone, and with a loud cry threw the magical stone into the very heart of the fire. As soon as it hit the flames, a dazzling explosion of energy burst forth, creating a powerful wave of magic that spread around. A loud bang and blinding light enveloped the hut and surroundings, and her slime magic transformed into a huge water dome, instantly extinguishing the raging fire and covering the place with a protective film. The magical force was so strong that Lucia was thrown backward. She rolled onto the ground, and at that moment, Lin's squad and knights appeared. "Princess," the knight shouted in alarm and rushed to help her up. Covered in dirt and with patches of earth, Lucia still tried to assure everyone that she was fine, though a bit stunned after expending so much mana. The knights of Archmage Amanda were stunned by the scale of magic Lusha had unleashed. Lusha explained that she had modified the magical stone so that it worked even when not held, but admitted that accidentally. Too much mana was poured, and the water mass became too large. The knights quickly realized that the people inside the water mass were still breathing, and rushed to find Belche, creating a grand and urgent scene among the still smoldering debris. Amazed, the knights watched as the giant magical water covered the flames. Someone noted that if this spell formula were made public, it would greatly help in extinguishing fires in the future. Knight Hugh nodded thoughtfully in agreement and promised to discuss it later with the Marquis. Lusha interrupted their thoughts with a shout. "The most important thing now is to make sure that the florist Belche is not stuck in the hut," but Hugh stopped her because it was dangerous and advised her to stay here and wait. Lucia swallowed her anxiety and agreed to step aside, watching as the knights forcefully broke into the hut hidden in the water mass. Maid Juliana asked if the princess could remotely recall the slime magic to ease the search. Lucia explained that she could not until she pulled the magic stone out of the water, and promised next time to tie a cord to the throne stone to better control it. Just at that moment, the knights loudly shouted that they had found someone inside. Lusha panicked and rushed into that magical mass of water. Juliana just gaped in surprise. She ran to where the knights surrounded some figure. One of the knights hastily handed her the found magic stone and asked her to dispel the spell so they could continue the rescue. Lucia instantly diverted the energy. The water disappeared, but as soon as the air normalized, she was hit by a sharp smell of burning, and she covered her mouth in horror. Before Lucia appeared a terrible sight. Belche lay motionless on the ground, his body battered and covered with soot. Lucia screamed in pain. Belle, and in tears, fell beside her friend. Soon it was reported that preliminary examinations indicated Belle was probably tied up and locked in the hut before the fire started. Lucia struggled to hold back sobbing, telling herself she could not break down now because Belle needed her help. Archmage Amanda and Lady Miriable arrived at the scene just in time. Amanda, shocked by Belle's terrible condition, decided that he had inhaled too much poisonous smoke and urgently needed treatment. Lucia desperately called Belle's name and exhaled with relief when he barely opened his eyes and looked at her. But as soon as she was about to ask Amanda to immediately bandage his wounds, Belle weakly intervened and she froze in surprise. Belle categorically refused immediate treatment despite unbearable pain, and this stunned Lusha and the surrounding knights. She shouted, asking why he was enduring this, and nearby a priest doubted aloud whether at least Belle would agree to painkillers. Belle barely nodded in the silence that fell on Maria, Belle, and Amanda. Lady Miriable gently cast a spell on Belle that relieves pain, while Lucia squeezed his hand and pressed him to say who had done this so mercilessly. Belle gathered his last strength and whispered the answer that instantly shattered the silence in the room. "Knights." Sir Hugh repeated this in shock, his face turned pale. Belle described that terrible memory. Knights in white uniforms, the royal guard, suddenly burst into the herb garden, declared it was an order from a high lord, and mercilessly destroyed the beds. When Belle rushed to stop them, he was brutally beaten, tied up, and thrown into a work pit, and before Lucia's eyes appeared this cold vision of knights acting on behalf of Prince Lyle, like a living nightmare. Bell continued that, after locking him in the cabin, they set it on fire. Fortunately, nearby he found scissors and cut the bonds with them. The most hellish moment of the fire, he remembered the magical stone that Princess Lucia had given him, and protected himself from the heat and smoke with it, and Bell weakly smiled, showed the stone to Lucia, and whispered that only thanks to her gift he was still alive. Bell was laid on a stretcher and hurriedly carried to the palace hospital. He was still wounded. Lucia stood motionless, watching the backs of the bearers, and quietly understood the bitter truth. Bell was extraordinarily clever. He consciously refused urgent help to preserve living evidence of the attack on the princess's florist, silently endured the pain, giving Lucia grounds to act against the offenders, and making her admire and grieve for her faithful friend even more. Lucia froze silently, looking at the ruined garden, and helplessness rose inside her. She thought how weak she was because she could not protect anything important, and suddenly realized those guards dared such violence because they saw in her only the third princess without power, and Belle just a low-ranking third florist. This contempt made Lucia grit her teeth in rage when she realized that harming her meant nothing to them. Rage burst out. Lucia screamed in indignation. Her clenched hands trembled. She swore not to leave this unpunished and declared that even if she was the third, royal she was royal. She vowed to take the princess's power into her own hands, seek justice, and make those who looked down on her pay dearly. At that moment, Archmistress Amanda stepped forward and offered to help Lucia plan a response to the offenders, decisively stating that she would help the princess teach those fools a proper lesson for daring to harm someone as talented and decent as Belche. Amanda pulled out a shining magical stone and began drawing an intricate magic circle on her palm, resolutely declaring that the time for revenge had come. Amanda explained that maintaining the Archmage's right would drain her mana, so she asked Lucia to pour her immense energy into the center of the circle. Lucia instantly placed her hand there, delighted because it was her specialty, and her powerful mana, combined with the Archmage's right, caused a dazzling explosion that enveloped them both. When the ritual ended, Amanda smiled contentedly at the now fully charged magical stone, praised Lucia's extraordinary talent, and said that with such an amount of mana even sounds could be reproduced vividly and clearly. When Lucia asked what kind of magic it was, Amanda proudly announced, "It is the magic of memory reproduction, the perfect means to reveal the truth." The scene shifted again to the Shining Palace, where Lucia decisively returned to prepare for the formal confrontation. She immediately ordered the maids to arrange an audience with King Isaac. She could not wait a second. One maid respectfully began to carry out the order, while Lucia was still drowning in grief over what had happened. When only the two of them remained, Lady Mariable gently embraced Lucia and soothingly calmed her, praising her for resilience and endurance, and this warmth broke through the wall around Lucia's feelings, causing the girl to burst into tears, telling how badly Belle had suffered defending the garden. Lucia sobbed in Mariable's arms as she recounted how Belle was beaten, kicked, and tied to the flames. What broke her heart the most was that Belle, despite the terrible pain, refused treatment to preserve evidence for her, and Lucia blamed herself, saying she was still so small and weak that she could not protect her florist from this horror. Lady Mariable lifted Lucia's tear-streaked face, and looking at her with a trusting, deep gaze, assured her that she was not as worthless as she thought, and asked if she knew what she had to do now to protect Belle. Her encouragement gradually helped Lucia gather herself and understand her duty to those devoted to her. Tears still glistened in her eyes, but a determined spark already burned in them. Lucia said she would never forgive those who harmed Belle and destroyed her herb garden, because it was an insult that could not be ignored, and she vowed to restore both the losses and her honor. Lucia looked ahead and resolutely said, "I will go look for my father now." The chapter ends with a powerful moment of growth. The young princess stands up for what is right. An urgent audience was announced when Princess Lucia entered the office with fierce anger, accompanied by Archmage Amanda and Knight Commander Hughes. 3 others followed them: Chant, Lynn, and Jill, which made Prime Minister Hound, who was consulting with King Isaac, ask in surprise why his son was here too. Jill awkwardly explained that a lot had happened, so he had to join, and Lucia immediately decisively told the whole story. The royal gardeners had destroyed the herb garden. They attacked the florist Belche, then set fire to the building to cover the tracks. This news deeply shocked King Isaac and Prime Minister Hound. Prime Minister Hound, with a cold face, remained skeptical and asked if it was really the royal guard, because they were nobles and unlikely to harm an innocent. Lucia insisted that the flower seller saw them in white security uniforms, but the Prime Minister denied that this was only the victim's one-sided testimony. Lucia exploded with rage, clenched her teeth, and fired at the Prime Minister, while the florist's testimony was considered worthless. Was it because of his low status despite being beaten and nearly burned alive that he was believed less than those of higher rank? The sharp gaze of the young princess momentarily confused Prime Minister Hound, but he continued to pretend to be impartial. Prime Minister Hound insisted that justice must be preserved. One cannot accuse a person based on a single statement without other witnesses. At that moment, Archmage Amanda smiled slyly and said that although there were no witnesses, she could recreate memories and reveal the whole truth, then enthusiastically explained that this advanced right is often used in serious cases and that it is Lucia's enormous mana that allows her to do this. Prime Minister Hound, stunned, blurted out that if such a thing existed it should have been shown immediately, and Amanda coldly replied that she only wanted to check whether the Prime Minister really intended to investigate to the end or cover for his subordinates. Lucia did not back down and asked whether the Prime Minister was belittling the whole matter just because the victim was merely an ordinary servant of the third princess, without any power, and besides, the Knight Commander Hughes spoke very authoritatively. Pointing to the ruined garden and to Bella's still fresh wounds living evidence, he forced Prime Minister Hound to concede and ordered the memory to be recreated. The magic worked and a painful series of memories appeared before everyone. Belchai froze in surprise when a group of Royal Guard knights in white uniforms burst into the garden. When he politely asked about their intentions, the leader coldly said that this was the third child's place, then indifferently drew his sword and began destroying the plants. Belle ran out in panic to stop them, shouting that these were the king's gifts for the princess, but they were not even moved and grabbed him by the collar. The leader smiled cruelly, said they were acting on His Highness's orders, and mockingly added that no one would care about some simple florist, even if the third princess raised a fuss. The memory ended with a brutal scene. Bella was thrown to the ground, kicked, and mocked that someone like him, without a patron, could die and no one would notice. The knight proclaimed that his master was the true heir, and that all traces would be erased by fire. His bestial laughter echoed as the den was engulfed in flames, and Belle, confused and desperate, stood amid the ruins, fully revealing the villains their true faces before the king and ministers. Archmage Amanda smiled as the recording cut off, and asked Prime Minister Ground if he recognized which family those knights in white uniforms belonged to. The Prime Minister froze, sweated, and King Isaac looked directly at his daughter and spoke her full name. Lucia Leal Fatisha. He solemnly asked the third princess in line for the throne what she considered the most serious problem in this matter. Lucia faced a difficult test for her soul when she realized that her father was evaluating the judgment of the future ruler. She hesitated whether it was the destruction of the royal garden or the contempt for royal authority, but resolutely answered that both were wrong, and the worst was that those men mercilessly attacked an innocent commoner who could not defend himself, and King Isaac nodded in approval. King Isaac smiled with relief and said that Lucia deserved the highest praise for that answer, because he always puts the lives of his subjects above all else, then pulled out another shining magical stone and showed that he had ordered it to be placed in the garden for secret observation. He turned to ask Amanda if she knew about the existence of the stone, and this greatly surprised the Archmage. Lucia quietly marveled to learn that Amanda also had hidden depths. King Isaac decisively said he would show his stone as additional evidence. He recorded the events from another angle, but the compromising result was the same. Prime Minister Hound feverishly demanded that the guilty be immediately arrested and punished, but the king made a decision that stunned everyone. King Isaac looked at Lucia with trust and announced that he would grant her the right to judge and punish those knights herself. Lucia exclaimed in shock, "Me, since such criminals were usually tried publicly." The king explained that by law a lord has the right to administer justice in his domains, and in the capital the final judge is the sovereign himself. King Isaac emphasized, since the incident occurred on palace grounds and those harmed served the royal house, the final word belongs to the monarch. When he entrusted Lucia with these powers, she could fully administer justice on his behalf. Regaining her confidence, Lucia placed her hand on her heart and boldly declared, "I will do it. I will judge them as fairly as possible." The king nodded approvingly and added that on the day of the trial, he required the presence of Queen Rouge and Prince Lyle as witnesses. Lucia immediately agreed, but requested that her brother Roy also be present. She feared that if only Lyle was criticized, someone might plot intrigues and shift the blame onto others, so Roy's presence would ensure maximum impartiality. King Isaac approved Lucia's request and ordered the Knight Commander Hughes and Prime Minister Hound to prepare everything thoroughly. He ordered Amanda not to share this information with anyone, not even with her husband, Chief Judge Rockwell, to preserve the element of surprise. Amanda smiled slyly and assured him that her husband was not a chatterbox, so everything would go smoothly. Lucia suddenly realized an important detail. The chief judge turned out to be Amanda's husband, and although this surprised her, she felt relieved. King Isaac ordered the evil knights to be imprisoned for 2 or 3 days until the trial began. Lucia asked why they would not be tried immediately, and the king gently explained that time was needed to copy the records from the magic stone and preserve the crime scene as evidence. Lucia left the room a little disappointed because she wanted justice here and now, but she knew that for a loud victory, one must prepare well. She forced herself to remain calm and used this time to discuss matters more thoroughly with her brother Roy and close friend Alicia. The chapter ends with the image of Lucia resolute in a deep black evening gown, ready for the difficult royal struggle ahead. In King Isaac Robert Fadage's office, the king himself sincerely apologized to Prime Minister Karba Hound for accidentally making him the villain in Lucia's staged test. The Prime Minister raised his glasses on the bridge of his nose and calmly replied that he was more than used to it. He firmly assured that he and Archmage Amanda would always stand by the princess, no matter what happened. Amanda smiled in agreement and said that Lucia truly resembled the late queen externally, and her determination came from the king. King Isaac gazed into the distance and gently whispered, "Caratina," remembering his beloved with loose hair and a radiant smile. Carefree years came alive in his memory when he laughed together with Caratina and Karba. Amanda and Hughes often gathered and joked like best friends. He silently dreamed that she was still alive and could see how their children were growing. The memory continued. Young Prince Roy gently smoothed Lucia's hair under a warm maternal gaze, and King Isaac reproached himself, repeating that the children had grown and inherited many of her good traits, but quickly returned to the present. Archmage Amanda joked that nostalgia was for the old, which made the king and prime minister blush, and Karba noted that all three were the same age, so if someone was old, it applied to all, and this small quarrel gave a rare moment of relaxation among the kingdom's rulers. The atmosphere suddenly became serious when Amanda raised the egoism and stubbornness of the second Prince Lyle. King Isaac said he had heard Karba's report, which was based on the story of his son Jill, and the palace servants also confirmed the prince's improper behavior. Prime Karba decided that Lyle this time really crossed all the boundaries and could no longer be ignored, and King Isaac sighed heavily in agreement and anxiously wondered what Queen Rouge was doing for her son to go so far. He explained Lyle's circumstances. At his age, he should be accountable in the Lesser Palace along with Lucia and Roy, but instead he stayed with his mother, Queen Rouge, in the inner courtyard. King Isaac noted that although raising Lyle was the queen's duty, it seemed she never intended to scold or correct him. Prime Karba added that perhaps the queen's indulgence led Lyle to a condescending attitude towards others. Archmage Amanda pointed out that the desecration of the king-gifted garden was a direct challenge to the monarch's authority. King Isaac thoughtfully admired how Lucia secretly placed a magical stone to fix the truth. King Isaac smiled proudly and declared that it was quite natural for him to watch over his little daughter when she was with a stranger, the florist Belle. Archmage Amanda smiled, noticing the obvious paternal tenderness. Prime Karba grimly changed the subject and asked if the king really intended to allow Lucia to conduct the court alone. King Isaac decisively said he trusted her skills because she was his daughter, and added that he left Lady Miriable in the Lesser Palace next to Lucia so she could be a good example for her, but Karba considered the inner court dangerous and full of intrigues today. So separating Lucia turned out to be a wise decision. Supreme Mage Amanda sharply asked if the sabotage in the garden was not a prank by Queen Rouge's own servants acting without orders. King Isaac thoughtfully said it was hard to imagine the queen herself directly ordering such crude actions. King Isaac recalled how excessively proud Queen Rouge was even at the academy, the daughter of a noble vassal who was always first in exams. For a person who valued honor and a flawless image, resorting to vile tricks against a child was unworthy of a true queen, so he concluded. Her greatest misfortune was that she was too cunning and proud to ever stoop to such nonsense. The memory of Queen Rouge's face appeared in the shadow with a mysterious smile behind broken glass, and King Isaac thought that if that tragedy had not happened, she could have lived a completely different life, not become his wife. He sighed anxiously. If Rouge found out about all Lyle's terrible deeds, including this case, a great storm would surely erupt. In the corner of the stage appeared a funny image of the suffering trio Jill, Lane, and Chant howling in despair because they had endured Lyle's behavior for too long, while Lucia sat in a chair with deep understanding on her face, mentally wondering how these three turned out to be so resilient to support such a problematic prince until today. In a quiet office, Tsar Isaac Robert Fadage bowed his head with a gloomy expression. It seemed to him that this matter was truly terrible. Prime Karba Hound sat opposite, as always calm, but with a touch of sarcasm said that the Tsar was never one to solve problems with his head, and added that he never thought he would be the one to comfort the Tsar, leaving Isaac silently endure the sharp tongue of his old friend. Suddenly Archmage Amanda Rockwell jumped to her feet, shining, and interrupted the men's conversation with stunning news about Princess Lucia's garden. The soil there has an enormous surplus of mana, and she passionately wants to explore the elixir together with Lucia. King Isaac, a little surprised, asked if that elixir was really the legendary panacea from the distant kingdom of Lascia, and Amanda's lively nod instantly charged the room with energy. After a short pause, King Isaac Robert Fadage agreed to consider Amanda's proposal, but insisted, First, it was necessary to deal with the destruction of the garden. Restoring the devastated land was his most urgent task. Prime Minister Karba also supported this, noting that if the root of the problem was not addressed, there would only be more trouble and exhaustion from the consequences. Amanda smiled mysteriously and said that these events had greatly interested her. The king and prime minister sighed, saying Amanda had always been so carefree and optimistic. King Isaac said that although this might be a small betrayal towards Lucia, they needed to take the opportunity and eradicate what surrounded Queen Rouge. This was a golden moment for the necessary cleansing to protect the kingdom. Prime Minister Carbo agreed, calling it a bitter but necessary medicine for the barren filter in the near future. The scene shifted to the quiet chambers of the smaller palace. Princess Lucia sat next to her brother Roy and Miss Alicia, slowly recounting the whole matter, starting from the next day when they met Lynn and Chant in the herb garden. She told that Prince Lyle suddenly burst into the garden and started a fierce argument with two servants. Lyle even ignored all Jill's objections and brazenly trampled her precious herb shoots, then angrily left. Prince Roy listened very seriously, resting his chin on his hand, pondering the reckless actions of his younger brother. Lucia continued that after Lyle's departure, she entrusted the garden to the florist Belche, but suddenly the royal guard knights returned and smashed everything, locked Belle in a hut and set it on fire to silence him, and she stated firmly that the evidence was convincing, so the king entrusted her to preside over the court. Alicia listened, sweat running down her face, overwhelmed and shocked by how much and how terrible it was. Nothing like she had imagined. She froze, not understanding how so much evil could have happened in her absence, and Roy whispered a sigh of relief that at least Lucia remained safe amid this chaos. Alicia anxiously asked about the condition of the florist Belche and whether his life was in danger. Prince Roy quickly reassured her, saying he was now under the care of the Knight Commander and was given pain-relieving magic, so his condition had stabilized. Returning to the main topic, Roy asked Lucia how she planned to deal with the Knight's crimes. Lucia wondered if this terrible event would affect the future Alicia feared, looked at her for confirmation, touched her chin, and thoughtfully said that in her memories this incident did not exist at all. It was clear everything had already begun to go off the original script. Alicia explained that in the original game plot, the main action begins only after 10 years, and the early events were only briefly described. For example, the king and Prince Roy had long since died. She insisted that this fire and attack on the florist were completely new circumstances that appeared after they tried to change fate. Prince Roy thoughtfully closed his eyes and noted that regardless of whether Lyle really staged the attack, their main goal remained to change the future. He smiled gently and said that if this event made Lyle even a little more mature, then as a brother. Brother fully supported this and would be extremely glad. Lucia looked at him with admiration, thinking Roy was truly impressively fair and kind, but suddenly his expression changed and coldly. Eerily, he began to talk about punishment for the knights, insisting that the simplest way was to accuse them of contempt for the royal family and execute them immediately, and Alicia immediately paled from this. She was allergic to the word execution and hastily objected that it was not her business and such an extreme punishment could not be applied. Roy listed the crimes: attempted murder, arson, destruction of royal property, insult to the princess, and concluded that by any measure the only worthy verdict was the death penalty. Lucia felt a lump in her chest and pressed her hand to it, anxious. Alicia noticed her strangeness and gently asked what was wrong, and Lucia hesitated and explained that simple execution still did not seem truly satisfying to her. Alicia curiously asked if Lucia was afraid that such a punishment would let them off too easily, and Lucia nodded, admitting that she could not find the right words, but always felt allowing them to die instantly was somehow unfair. Alicia explained that Lucia probably meant a quick death was more of a relief than a full reckoning for their sins. Lucia puffed her cheeks and insisted that Florist Belle suffered terrible physical and emotional pain, and the fact that they could end it all in a second was unacceptable. She believed that if Belle still had so many wounds, it was only fair that they too should suffer the same pain. Alice was shocked when she realized that Lucia wanted the knights to feel the same as they inflicted before they were executed, and she exclaimed in astonishment, "That's all." Lucia thought that regarding fear, Belle must have endured a much greater horror being trapped in flames, so she innocently asked which was scarier, beheading by guillotine or poisoning, and suddenly behind them appeared Archmage Amanda, who, referring to Professor Rendall, said that most people would choose poison to go peacefully. Alicia nearby felt as if she were being told terrifying details she would never want to know. Lucia took a sip of lemon tea, grimaced at the sharp sourness, exhaled, and admitted that after the discussion she herself got confused and no longer knew what punishment would be the fairest. Prince Roy smiled gently and quite unexpectedly, asked Lucia if she wanted him to conduct the trial instead of her. He added that if she asked, their father would definitely allow him to intervene immediately, and this offer stunned Lucia. His caring attention made her heart tremble. But Lucia's childhood memories surfaced. She saw the sanctity of life from caring for yet-to-bloom flowers, through helping during the birth of a foal, to watching the first chick break the shell and hatch. She also mentioned the chicks prepared for the banquet as food, and realized that those sacrifices give people life. She thought all those experiences made her the strong lucha she was today. Therefore, she decisively rejected Roy's proposal and insisted that she herself, as a member of the royal family, would preside over the court. She loudly declared that life is a priceless treasure that must never be taken for vile purposes, and the cruel acts of the Gardenites are something she will never forgive or let go just like that. Seeing his sister's determination, Prince Roy smiled with satisfaction and promised to always support her and intervene if she found it difficult. Alicia touched her chin and thoughtfully asked herself why no requests or pleas had come from the Knight family so far. She analyzed, most of the Gardenites are usually the younger or youngest sons of noble families, so their grave silence aroused strong suspicions, and Lucia nodded in agreement indeed. No one uttered a single plea or asked for mercy. Prince Roy also felt that something was wrong and agreed with Alicia, suggesting that if they were sentenced to death, there might be a substitution or trick to give them a chance to escape. Lucia frowned, saying that damaging the guillotine or substituting the poison in the palace was almost impossible, but Alicia quickly replied that substituting the poison would be quite simple with the help of an insider. Suddenly, the image of Dr. Rockwell at the autopsy flashed in their minds as if a reminder. One must make sure the person is truly dead. Roy decided that even if someone had swapped the poison, it would be very difficult to fool the doctors and guards at the city gates. Alicia, putting her finger to her lips, thoughtfully added a gloomier version. If someone influential enough bribed everyone in the palace, hiding the truth was entirely possible, and she even revealed knowledge from a previous life how to temporarily suppress the pulse by pressing a round object into the armpit to cut off blood circulation in the arm. Alicia explained that if you guess the moment exactly, you can perfectly pretend to be dead, and this impressed Lucia. She exclaimed that Alicia sounded like a real thief with cunning plans, which made Alicia flustered and deny it, insisting that these were just movie tricks from her past life. Prince Roy picked up a small ball and seriously began to analyze Alicia's theory, nodding that if you know when to fall, you can really fool people about your death. Lucia and Roy nodded in unison. If that happened, the execution would turn into a perfect release scenario for the guilty. They feared that if the men staged their deaths and secretly escaped back to their domains, they could continue to live freely as if nothing had happened. Lucia sighed heavily in despair. She still could not come up with such a severe punishment to stop them and leave no loopholes for escape. In the tense silence, Robin suddenly appeared and boldly suggested sending them to the domain of Viscount Radal, and his unexpected appearance made Alicia and Lucia jump, not understanding how long he had been standing there. Prince Roy joked that people were exactly scared by Robin's habit of hanging around like a shadow, and Robin himself apologized for the suddenness, saying he was just fulfilling the duty of a loyal courtier, staying close to the prince, then very politely greeted Alicia and asked not to pay too much attention to his quiet presence. Lucia curiously asked why it should be her grandfather's domain. She recalled that Viscount Radal was their maternal relative with Roy. Robin enthusiastically explained that the land was called Cattage, the native land of many servants of the Lesser Palace, including himself and Uliana, pulled out a map and showed Lucia the location of the domain on the very border with the Kingdom of Laren, where dense ancient forests teem with dangerous monsters that often appear and torment the locals. Robin smiled slyly and reported that this year there were a record number of monster outbreaks here. He suggested that instead of executing the knights, it would be better to send them to the border to work hard and join the border patrols. Lucia and Alicia froze at the very thought of the harsh struggle for survival in the ancient forest full of monsters. Robin insisted that the daily fight for their own lives was the best way to make them truly appreciate the life they once despised. Lucia fell silent, realizing that this was indeed an instructive punishment, although she still had fears. Lucia awkwardly asked Robin if it would be too hard for her grandfather to send such offenders to his lands. She feared that he would have to supervise these scoundrels and work hard, but Robin just winked and confidently said that no grandfather would refuse to help his little dear granddaughter. The chapter ended with Robin's sly smile next to the little princess, who was beginning to look for a new path for herself, to administer their own justice. The day of the final trial arrived. In the luxurious halls of the Lesser Palace, Lucia quietly sat on the sofa, with a worried face and clenched hands from tension, although quite some time had passed since that incident. Lady Miriable stood beside her and gently placed her hand on Lucia's shoulder, giving her strength. Her trusting, gentle smile encouraged everything would definitely turn out the way she wished. A few days later, the moment when Lady Marable was preparing Lucia's outfit for the audience with the king vividly resurfaced in memory. Lucia timidly called the lady by name and confessed that she had one selfish, childish request that she wanted Marable to hear. Marable smiled gently and invited her to voice her wish. Lucia gathered all her courage and looked at the lady with the sincerest eyes, preparing to finally express the feeling she had long kept inside. Lucia shyly bowed her head and asked Lady Marable if, after everything, she could call her mom instead of using the respectful title. This innocent but tender request so moved Marable that she covered her mouth in surprise, then nodded cheerfully and confirmed that she would gladly accept this tenderness from the princess, and Lucia beamed and exclaimed, "Mom, enjoy it," thinking that with this sacred support, she would definitely handle the next challenge excellently. Returning to the present, Alicia and Lucia rehearsed the plan one last time in front of the mirror, assuring each other that they had missed nothing, and just then there was a knock at the door, and Prince Roy's voice asked if his sister was ready. Lucia excitedly announced that her brother had arrived and was already about to enter, and Lady Marable lightly held her hand for a moment as, a quiet blessing before, Lucia stepped onto the turbulent path of royal duty. Lady Marable gently raised her palms to Lucia's face and placed a blessed kiss on her forehead, praying that the gods would always protect her and grant clarity of thought. Moved, Lucia thanked the lady and walked away with confident, determined steps. The lady replied, "Yes," and Lucia rejoiced upon seeing Prince Roy waiting in the corridor, ready to accompany his sister to the court hall. Walking down the quiet corridor, Prince Roy noticed that Lucia was trembling and slightly pale from nerves, and again offered to appear in court instead of her. Lucia, with eyes wide open from tension, loudly exclaimed that she really wanted him to replace her right now because it was her first time facing such a great event. She quickly pulled herself together and asked her brother to hold her hand tightly until they reached the courtroom so she would feel more confident. Roy smiled and agreed, and they set off, holding hands under the bright palace sun. Courtroom doors opened before them, revealing a huge, solemn space with towering vaults and luxurious stained glass, and Lucia and Roy held their breath for a moment, absorbing the cold, pressure-filled atmosphere of the place that would decide the fate of the guilty and the honor of the royal family. The most influential people gathered in the courtroom's premier hound, Knight Captain Hughes and Archmage Amandal froze, watching the arrival of the princess. In the witness section, Florist Belche, still with bandages on his face, clearly sighed with relief upon seeing Lucia accompanied by the maid Juliana, and Lucia took a deep breath and stepped into the center under everyone's gaze. Chief Judge Pico Rockwell, husband of Archmage Amanda, bowed respectfully and politely introduced himself to Lucia, and Lucia responded just as politely and sincerely thanked him for finding time for this case. The hall suddenly grew cold when Princess Consort Rouge Vatigia appeared, mother of Prince Lyle, majestic and at the same time detached. Lucia slightly shuddered at her sharp beauty and commanding presence, a woman of great intellect and pride, who stood there to witness the sentencing of a child. Tension in the courtroom reached its peak. King Isaac Robert Fatija, Prime Minister Carba Hound, and senior ministers occupied the most solemn seats. Prince Roy stood next to Lucia where Lyle would normally be, although he was pushed aside to make way for the official proceedings. Knight Hughes and Archmage Amanda stood behind with anxious faces as the guard knights were led into the hall, and Lucia froze for a moment in shock upon seeing 3 knights pale and full of remorse kneeling at the foot of the throne. The trial began the moment Lucia declared, in a decisive, firm voice, that she had gathered everyone to clarify the attempted murder a few days ago. Arson targeted the Florist Belche. She shifted her gaze to Belle, who sat silently, face and body in bandages, while Princess Consort Rouge watched from afar with a sharp, unreadable expression. Suddenly, one of the shackled knights shouted at King Isaac, demanding to know why they had to endure such humiliation. In anger, he exclaimed what crime he had committed to be treated like a vile criminal. The knight continued speaking with hypocritical words, insisting that they were sworn loyalists, always ready to give their lives for the crown, and that they could not accept being wrongfully mistreated. King Isaac, sitting above, listened with a cold, contemptuous look. Lucia stood silently, looking at him with a calm but authoritative gaze, and mentally deciding that this man truly knew how to speak beautifully to dare to present his life as a hollow excuse, then turned to Chief Judge Rockwell and confirmed before everyone the judicial authority entrusted to her by the king. Chief Judge Pico Rockwell smiled, and as if putting a full stop, announced that by the will of King Isaac, Princess Lucia had full authority to consider this case. This stunned the accused knight. He stammered, and asked how a child like the princess could decide matters of life and death. Lucia coldly cut him off with a reminder that the king never allowed them to speak freely here. She firmly demanded that those knights, or rather, former knights, admit themselves as criminals, and emphasized that, until the truth became known, even Bella's wounds could not be treated impartially. With a haughty posture, Lucia declared that even being third in line for the throne, royal honor weighs more than traitors. She ordered Judge Rockwell to immediately summon the magic of memory reproduction so that the stubborn culprits would have no chance to deny it, and Rockwell obediently carried out the order while the knights began to panic. The leader exclaimed in despair that it was all orchestrated by Lucia to frame them, insisting that they acted only on the orders of some Your Highness, with powerful backing, believed that no matter how much noise Lucia made, she wouldn't touch a hair on the heads of those protected by such influential patrons. Memory played again before her eyes, and for the first time made Princess Consort Rouge cover her face in horror. The cruelty of her subordinates shocked her. Lucia realized this was the first time the consort personally witnessed a crime, and cast her a thoughtful glance. In the corner, Prince Lau began to tremble with fear as everything came to light, and Lucia turned to the knights with a difficult question. Was her third place in line really a sufficient reason to destroy the flower garden and cold-bloodedly plot a murder? The knights stubbornly insisted it was a bandit attack, and that supposedly Lucia's powerful magic must have altered the memories, but Lucia coldly retorted, why would Belle, a man who never even lived in the palace or met them, bother to stage such a carefully planned show out of hatred? Step by step she cornered them with her iron logic. Belle stood on the brink of life and death. How could he have created such a cunning magical reproduction in such a short time? Silence fell around. Sweat poured from him, could not give any reasonable explanation. Lucia cast a quick glance at her brother and felt. All hope in Lyle was in vain. His cowardly, selfish expression said it all. Then she turned to the chief judge and asked what punishment the law currently prescribes for attempted murder and arson. Judge Rockwell calmly said that according to the criminal code, the most appropriate sentence for such serious crimes is the death penalty, and as soon as the word death was uttered, King Isaac barely glanced at Lucia, as if trying to catch her last reaction. Lucia silently watched Lyle and noticed that he remained speechless, not daring to defend his people or take the blame. Before making the final decision, she said she would ask the knights one question: who exactly is this, Your Majesty, they relied on and took orders from? The direct question instantly froze. The hollow eyes fell on Prince Lyle, who stood in the corner as if petrified. Lucia's question so surprised Prince Lyle that his eyes opened wide and his face turned pale. Everyone from Belche and Alicia to Roy held their breath, waiting for the second prince's answer in this stifling tension. Suddenly, Consort Princess Rouge asked Lyle in a cold, commanding tone if he had anything to say, and Lyle froze under the watchful, disapproving gazes, his clenched, trembling hands revealing complete emotional collapse before this harsh truth. Prince Lyle was struck with fear, and the leader suddenly shouted a desperate plea to Princess Consort Rouge, hysterically insisting that Lyle had nothing to do with it to justify their future lord. Lucia silently watched this clumsy performance, her eyes cold, and the princess consort raised an eyebrow and asked in a commanding voice who, if not Lyle, dared to give the order for such cruel acts. Calm but sharp as a blade, the pressure of the companion made Lucia flinch, and in Marvel's soul, the breath froze from that crushing force she exerted over her followers. The knight trembled, bowed his head, and whispered a confession they decided everything themselves, without anyone's instruction. The knight hit his head dully on the ground, and explained that in their zeal to earn praise and catch the eye of Prince Lyle, they devised a crazy plan to plunder the garden. He cunningly excused himself, saying they had no idea about the reputation and importance of Princess Lucia, and that was what confused them. Consort Princess Rouge crossed her arms and coldly asked if they really believed that ignorance could justify such cruel, violent acts, and Lucia watched. Impressed by her firm stance, she expected Rouge to defend her people, but instead the consort interrogated them most harshly. Rouge suddenly turned, threw a fiery glance at Lyle, and shouted that he must honestly answer what exactly he said in their presence that led to this tragedy, and her commanding shout made Lyle jump and stammer, whispering "Mother" in complete horror. Lucia observed the family quarrel from afar and thought that due to the distance she would not hear the quiet, tense whisper between mother and son, until suddenly King Isaac slammed the table to attract attention and gestured for Lucia to announce her final verdict to the culprits. But when she was about to speak, Consort Princess Rouge suddenly fell to her knees and loudly begged the king to wait. Rouge decisively stated that no excuse makes their vile crimes acceptable. She admitted if Lyle's careless words caused that incident, then Lyle must bear responsibility and deservedly receive punishment from the kingdom. This shocking statement stunned Lucia and everyone in the courtroom. Lucia could not believe that the consort voluntarily demanded public punishment of her own son. In the suffocating silence, King Isaac closed his eyes and hesitated over the consort's request. The knight in chains again found the courage to speak, and Lucia coldly allowed him to say his last words. The knight pleaded with Consort Princess Rouge, begging her to withdraw the demand to punish Lyle, and insisted that the sabotage was committed solely by themselves. He fell to his knees and swore that Prince Lyle was truly innocent and knew nothing about their plan, which made Lucia frown with deep suspicion. That night, whose sly smile again surfaced in her memory, now feigned absolute loyalty, trying to remove guilt from Lyle. He admitted that their contempt for the princess was obvious but shifted it onto the servants who failed to advise their master in time. Lyle stood nearby, with tears in his eyes and torn by doubts, watching his people sacrifice themselves to protect him. Lucia stared into the knight's eyes and wondered if it was true loyalty or cold calculation to preserve the future of the one they bet on. Rouge sighed and thought that even if they took all the blame, the truth was that they put personal gain above all else and trampled royal authority, and she bitterly admitted that her son's foolishness contributed to this tragedy. Turning and looking the king straight in the eyes, she again insisted that Lyle be strictly judged. The king cast a glance at her and asked if she was really ready to allow her son to be deprived of life, and Rouge decisively stated that she could not tolerate that because of the reckless whims of the prince, other lives were treated lightly. Lucia felt sharp anxiety. Rouge's position made the imposition of the death penalty almost impossible, and she thought that from the very beginning she never wanted to take anyone's life. King Isaac suddenly shifted the responsibility to Lucia, stunning her and arousing deep resentment towards her father for placing such a thorny matter on her. After a moment of weighing unexpected factors, Lucia said she had decided the punishment for the group of knights, and she fully entrusted the punishment of Prince Lyle to the king. King Isaac nodded and asked if Lucia intended to apply the death sentence they had discussed earlier. Lucia firmly replied that she had initially planned to, but when she heard them insult her mother's homeland, she changed her mind. She firmly declared that her grandfather's borderlands were the kingdom's shield against monsters and foreigners, and contempt for that land was a deadly mistake, so she condemned the entire group of knights to exile to the border guard, forcing them to taste the bitter truth of battle so they would finally understand the price of protecting people. The knight trembled at the sentence, but still whispered his confession in complete humiliation. Lucia Coley dealt another devastating blow. She revealed that all the knights' families had submitted requests to sever ties, so now they would no longer receive any support from the capital. She looked at the desperate leader and firmly stated that from now on he had nothing left but his own labor, after the trial ended and the criminals were taken away. Belchai finally sighed with relief. Now his wounds would be properly treated. Lucia was glowing and waving to everyone with joy that they had achieved at least some justice, but quickly sank into anxiety looking at Lyle, because the next battle for her brother's fate was just beginning. After the public trial ended, the scene moved to a private room where only the key figures remained: King Isaac, Princess Consort Rouge, and Prince Lyle, who stood bent over as if guilty. In another corner, Princess Lucia with her brother Roy silently observed, and Chancellor Carba Hound, Knight Commander Hughes, and Archmages Amanda with her husband stayed nearby to witness the conclusion of the matter. King Isaac looked intently at Lyle and sternly said that if he had grievances or hidden anger, he should say them now. Prince Lyle suddenly broke down in tears, hysterically sobbing, pouring out a flood of long-accumulated accusations and disappointments, and the air became unbearably heavy because of it. Lucia thought about it. While everyone believed that Lyle lived in luxury and had all the privileges, he had never truly felt happiness or luck. King Isaac silently listened to his son's reproaches, his face showing deep contemplation and confusion. Meanwhile, Princess Consort Rouge, on the verge of endurance, pressed her hand to her forehead from pain and disappointment, then surprisingly looked at Lyle with eyes of fierce remorse and blurted out bitter words that she wished she had never given birth to him, stunning everyone in the room with the cruelty of a mother whose love was finally broken.